The TV news reported an incredible event that will go down in history. The previously sent Apollo 11 landed on the moon. The screen showed a close-up of the one-man crew slowly descending to the lunar surface, step by step. These steps marked the beginning of a new era in human history. People have a hero who left the first traces in such an unknown space as space. A man-made robot with artificial intelligence has been announced as the first astronaut to reach the moon. In 1995, towards the end of his life, Einstein announced the long-awaited completion of his theory of the universe. Soon, humanity made a big breakthrough in the field of science. Exactly 1 year later, the United World Assembly announced the 3 laws of robotics to control created artificial intelligence and guide legislation. Gradually, the need for human workers began to disappear, and they were replaced by robots. Sometime later, almost 80% of the population no longer needed work. In 1997, after many major scientific advances, the world economy entered a golden age. The tractor dumped all the garbage into one large pile, which could indicate that someone's home had been here some time ago. Our hero was fond of drawing and did not miss the opportunity to capture everything that caught his attention. And now he was watching the tractor in action, sitting a little away from it and sketching all the details. While drawing, Sam didn't notice how quickly time was passing around him. Suddenly, a large doll-like object flew into the pile of garbage. This caught the hero's attention, causing him to flinch in surprise. Taking a closer look, he realized that it was a broken robot. The next moment, an idea came to him. At the same time, in her laboratory, the woman was studying the news about a new virus that was sweeping all sectors of the world. One clear symptom of this virus was coughing up blood. Suddenly, the door to the room opened and her grandson's voice reached her. Looking up from the screen, Louise turned to the boy, asking what had happened. Sam said with a happy smile that he had found something amazing. Louise, not understanding what caused such a violent reaction from the guy, asked what exactly he found. He turned sideways to her, showing the broken robot. Seeing him, the woman told Sam to weigh him. Then she would pay him for the scrap metal. But the hero objected that he was not here for that at all. He pointed to the robot's hands, saying that they were moving. Afterwards, Louise came closer and, taking a closer look, said that she could give him more for a functioning power source. But Sam again objected, asking her to save this robot. The woman was very surprised by her grandson's request. He begged her to fulfill his request because she was good at fixing things. Taking out a new cigarette, Louise asked if he had money. The hero replied that he would never force his grandmother to work for free and pressed the button on the watch. After he displayed his score on the screen, Sam showed it to her, saying that it was all he had. She froze for a moment when she saw his balance. After giving him a slap on the head, she said that for 1,500 marks he wouldn't even buy a hamburger. A few days later, a head was attached to the robot and some non-functional parts were replaced. Sam came to inspect his robot after a long 3 days of waiting. He asked his grandmother what the robot had with a face. She replied that this part was the most expensive, and if he wanted to put on a different face, then let him pay for it himself. After her words, the guy again turned his attention to the robot, and having examined it more carefully, asked why all robots wear the same clothes. Louise replied that this is required by law in order to distinguish them from people. Suddenly, the robot's eyes began to glow. A couple of moments later, the robot girl began to slowly rise, which made our hero very happy. After looking around, the robot asked where she was, because she was sure that they had gotten rid of her earlier. The hero sat down opposite her, and taking her hand in his palms, said that he was very glad that she was alive. The robot looked at him for a couple of seconds, and then asked if he was her new owner. The guy nodded and told her his name. When he asked her name, she didn't understand what the guy meant and gave her model number. Sam cocked his head to the side, saying it was too weird a name. Then he looked around. On the table, the hero noticed a package of chocolate. The next moment, he snapped his fingers, screaming that this was perfect. Then he turned to the robot and said that from now on he would call her Jane. Louise said that her work is finished, and now the guy can take the robot and leave, because she has a lot of work left. After thanking her, the hero headed for the exit, saying that next time he will have enough money to buy a new face for Jane. The woman stood without turning around all this time, waiting until the door slammed on the other side. When Sam left, a suppressed cough broke out. After the attack passed, Louise saw that her entire palm was covered in blood. She realized that the symptoms of the virus had appeared, and she didn't have much time left. Sam returned with Jane to his house. Having started to sort out the rubbish that had accumulated inside for quite a long time, she accidentally broke a plate. The hero looked away from the canvas and asked if everything was okay with the robot. She apologized and started cleaning up the pieces. The guy who stood up replied that she shouldn't worry about it, because he found it in a landfill, and it wasn't of much value. Having settled down next to her, Sam began to help her, and in the process asked Jane to call him something else, and not master. She didn't have time to answer anything when she accidentally touched a mountain of rubbish behind her, after which everything fell to the floor. Sam just screamed that it was amazing. Inspecting the resulting mess, he said that he had long dreamed of cleaning it all up. Jane apologized to him, saying that her neural network parameters were damaged, so her motor functions were very limited. She was very upset that at the moment it would be very difficult for her to be useful for her master. The hero replied that everything was fine and nothing needed to be done for him. After his words, Jane approached him and quoted one of the laws, which states that a robot cannot allow people to get hurt due to its negligence. She explained that following this law, it is necessary to get rid of robots that are not able to help the owner for one reason or another. The guy looked at her in surprise when she told him to get rid of her if she stopped being useful to him. He scratched his head, saying that he had not studied these laws before. Afterwards, he asked for some time to think. A few minutes later, he got a great idea. The hero said that he wants to see Jane smile. She looked at him with confusion. The guy explained that now this is impossible because of her doll head. Then he translated the image from the clock, saying that he had a plan to implement his idea. Sam showed her an advertisement for an upcoming art competition in 3 months and told her that the grand prize would be enough to buy her a new face. After listening to him, Jane said that she was not able to smile. Even she would have a face suitable for this. The hero didn't let her finish, asking how she knew this if she hadn't even tried. He said he was looking forward to seeing her smile. Taking her hand, the hero smiled softly and said that he believed that Jane would succeed. Afterwards, he stood up and, stretching, asked if she had any ideas worthy of first place. She thought for a few seconds. A moment later, Jane spoke about his request earlier, informing him that one of the laws forbade her to address the owner by his name. Raising her head, she asked if Mr. Sam could address him. The guy smiled, answering that this option suits him. In the evening, they headed to the landfill together, collecting things that interested the hero. That night, they fell asleep together. The days passed by. Sometimes they visited Louise, helping her with the cleaning. In the evenings, Sam spent his time drawing, trying to draw something worthy of first place. Louise spent these days conducting her research, waiting for the disease to finally get the better of her. On one of these days, her grandson burst into her laboratory with joyful cries. Showing her his award for the competition, he said that he managed to take first place. The woman looked in surprise at the joyful boy. When he asked if he could now buy a new face for Jane, Louise just smiled. A week later, the robot's face was changed from a doll's to a human's. The hero was beside himself with joy. Looking at herself in the mirror, Jane assumed that some kind of mistake had occurred because her eyes and face shape looked strange. But Sam convinced her otherwise. He reminded her of his request earlier and asked her to try to smile. Jane had difficulty controlling her facial expressions and, squeezing out some distant semblance of a smile, asked if this was what the hero meant. The guy didn't know what to answer her and could only stand silently. When she tried a new expression, he admitted that it looked very creepy. A sudden cough behind him caught his attention, and Sam turned to Louise. Seeing that my grandmother sat down on the floor, holding her hand on the table, he asked what happened to her. Sam wanted to touch her, but the woman shouted at him to move away from her. The next moment, she stood up and said that she was just a little tired, so she needed to rest a little, and it was time for Sam to go back. The hero looked at her doubtfully. Afterwards, he went outside with Jane, saying that if she needed anything, she could call him at any time. Having said this, the guy slammed the door. Left alone, Louise slowly walked towards the mirror, struggling with new coughing attacks. She leaned her hand on the mirror, smearing her blood on it. Raising her head, the woman saw that her eyes had already begun to turn red. Walking along the village, Sam shared his worries about the health of Grandma Jane. She walked behind him and practiced her smile. Noticing her upset expression, he said that she did not need to rush and force herself to smile, because smiling is a natural reaction to some event. Jane replied that she did not quite understand what exactly the hero was trying to convey to her. Sam stopped when he heard that she couldn't understand the concept of a smile. He tried to explain everything to her in more detail. After listening to him, Jane asked to get rid of her because she could not obey the only order of her master and was breaking one of the laws. The guy looked at her in surprise when she said that she was just a pile of scrap metal, the existence of which was devoid of any meaning. The hero couldn't listen to it anymore. He shouted at her to shut up. With his head bowed, Sam told her to listen carefully to what he was about to tell her. When the robot heard that despite what the law dictates to them, her owner would never leave her, she was sincerely surprised. Saying this, the hero remembered his painful past. A few years ago, his mother packed her things and wanted to leave. He tried to stop her, but received only another resounding slap in the face. The boy lay with tears in his eyes and watched as his mother turned around and left somewhere forever. That day, he sat outside the door for a very long time, hoping not that she would change her mind and come back. Coming out of the memories, the hero looked into Jane's eyes, saying that he does not abandon his family members. Then he asked her to never say that about herself again. He folded his hands on his chest and added that if he heard again that he needed to get rid of her, he would be very offended. Stunned, Jane stood for several seconds before answering a word. Suddenly, Sam started bleeding from his nose. The robot girl, who did not expect this, watched this in surprise. A second later, she leaned towards her equally surprised master, asking what had happened. But Sam was unable to answer her due to a sudden bout of coughing up blood. He fell to his knees, coughing up blood. A few minutes later, the hero lost consciousness, and the robot girl put him on her back. She activated navigation mode to find the nearest hospital. A couple of seconds later, Jane received the necessary data and immediately headed in the indicated direction. Suddenly, something caught her attention. Wary, she decided to stop. The street ahead was on fire and people turned into monsters and devoured each other. Some tried to escape from the crowd of zombies, but eventually they overtook their victims. One of the men who contacted tried to break into the telephone booth of his victims. Jane turned to the system to find out the details of what was happening around her. She waited for several seconds to connect to the central database. Suddenly, heavy footsteps were heard behind her and Jane turned around. A zombie was approaching them. The robot decided to scan the person in front of it. She walked throughout the body, collecting data. A moment later, it was determined that the creature was no longer human. Jane realized that he and his kind posed a serious threat to her master. The zombie has virtually no traces of human DNA, which gave her a free hand. Jane finished gathering information, closing her eyes. A moment later, her bracelet began to glow. She said that all elements that pose a threat to humans must be eliminated immediately. Surrounding sounds began to reach the unconscious Sam. A couple of seconds later, with great effort, he managed to open his eyes. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't come out with anything other than a wheeze. Having given up these attempts, he paid attention to what was happening around him. The houses were on fire, the street was strewn with dead bodies of people, while others behaved strangely and bit others. Suddenly, there was an explosion somewhere nearby, and the flames ignited with renewed vigor. This attracted the attention of the zombies. They broke away from their victims and headed in the direction where the explosion had been heard a second ago. Louise watched what was happening through the window of her house. The woman put out another half-smoked cigarette. The day she feared most had arrived. Louise pushed aside the desk drawer with the pistol inside. Taking it in her hands, she pointed the trigger to her temple, and the next second a shot rang out. At the same time, Jane was still standing opposite the zombie with Sam on her back. He slowly approached his victim. When Jane was about to get rid of the threat, the hero managed to squeeze out the words that she could not do this and extended his hand to her clenched fist. The guy reminded her of the law prohibiting harming people. Although the words were given to the hero with great difficulty, he was obliged to stop her, because robots that violate the law he mentioned are destroyed. Sam asked Jane to promise him that she would never harm people. All this time, the robot girl looked at him in surprise. A moment later, she threw the guy to the ground. Sam didn't understand what caused Jane's reaction, but the next second she asked him who he was. The hero asked with confusion what she meant. The robot girl explained that she was unable to identify either his voice or his iris. Scanning the guy once again, she was unable to obtain any information about him, after which she announced that she would classify Sam as another dangerous specimen. Jane was sure that the guy lying in front of her was not her master, so she turned around, saying that she had to find him. The amazed Sam looked at his robot, not believing what was happening. He was able to call out to her only when she moved a few meters away from him, but Jane did not pay any attention to him, continuing to look for her master. Suddenly, Sam had another coughing fit. A couple of moments later, he heard footsteps approaching him and looked up to see who it was. The next second, he saw a crowd of zombies approaching him. At the same time, Jane ran further and further down the street in search of the real Sam. She suddenly stopped when she noticed something strange. A couple of meters away from her stood the same robot girl, and the man sitting in front of her asked her for help. She also scanned him to verify his identity, just as Jane had done earlier. A couple of seconds later, the robot girl said that the man was not her master, after which she lost all interest in the man calling out to her. She went in search of her owner, gradually moving away from this place. Jane turned around when she heard another robot's voice behind her. Nearby, a robotic man sat next to the body of his dead owner. Closing her eyes, he said that, following the law to ensure the confidentiality of the owner in the event of death, all data on the robot must be deleted. Within a few seconds, automatic erasure of all data will begin. Looking around, Jane discovered many robots similar to her, in search of their owners and those who were preparing to erase all data. Sometime later, she reached the house where she and Sam had lived all this time. Opening the front door, the robot girl stepped into an unlit room. Having scanned everything inside, she discovered that there was no one here except her. Suddenly, something caught her attention. Jen looked at the wall covered with Sam's drawings. Memories of the hero asking her to pose flashed through her mind. She stood for several minutes at this wall. Suddenly, she remembered Louise's house, where her master might be, and headed there. Sometime later, Jane approached our hero's grandmother's house. When she entered the house, it was unusually quiet inside. The robot girl went deeper into the house, exploring each of the rooms, and in one of them she discovered a dead body. Jane stopped to scan it and get information about the identity of the person in front of her. Having established her identity, she walked over and sat down next to Louise. Jane remembered what Louise had told her when she changed her face. The woman said that Sam's mother abandoned him when he was 5 years old, which is why he now sympathizes with Jane, because someone abandoned her too. Louise sighed heavily and continued, saying that she had become not just some machine for the guy, but the family that he valued more than anything in the world. She then asked Jane to stay by Sam's side no matter how much he might change. The robot girl covered the dead body with a found sheet. After confirming Louise's death, she returned to searching for Sam. A minute later, she left the house thinking about possible options for her master's location. Jane stopped walking down the stairs. Several zombies were approaching her. When she turned around, intending to go in a different direction, the zombies immediately attacked her. She managed to dodge one of them. Jane decided to remove the obstacle. Gathering all the strength in her fist, she rushed at the zombies. But a guy suddenly jumped out and blocked her path. Jane scanned the man who stopped her, trying to determine his identity. The robot girl noticed that he had a biological signature similar to Sam's. Suddenly, the hero let out a roar. The guy tried to drive other zombies away from Jane in a similar way. His idea was a success, and a couple of moments later, the zombies turned around and headed in an unknown direction. Jane watched what was happening in surprise. At some point, the guy's growl became quieter, and small tremors began to break through his body. The hero desperately tried to pronounce the words, while he still had the ability to control his own consciousness, which was gradually becoming clouded with fog. After several attempts, he managed to ask if Jane was okay. He slowly turned towards the wary robot girl, saying that he had something important to tell her. She scanned his voice and iris again, but received the same information as before. The man's identity was impossible to determine. Sam continued to approach her. He said that he wouldn't last long, so he had to have time to tell her. A few seconds later, he managed to take Jane's hand. After that, he said that the last 3 months that they spent together, he was truly happy because he had a family. All this time, the robot carried out various checks to establish his identity, but they all gave Jane the same answer. Suddenly, Sam was overcome with weakness and fell to his knees, the robot supporting him by his arms, preventing his torso from collapsing to the ground. Jen recalled various moments and desperately tried to convince herself that the guy in front of her was not her master. But his words and attitude towards her were no different from the real Sam. At some point, unconsciously to herself, she began to cry. Sinking to the ground, Jane hugged the guy, recognizing him as her master. She called his name, expecting some kind of response. Her tears fell onto Sam's face. The robot girl lowered her head over his, asking him to look at her face. She wanted him to see her smile, which she finally got after so many attempts. But the hero did not have any reaction. The virus finally took over his body. The next moment, he rose from Jane's lap and was about to bite her. She just watched the guy with tears frozen in her eyes. When he did bite her, Jen only squeezed Sam tighter in her arms. The guy tried to bite her hand, but was defeated over and over again. Due to an unknown virus on this day, the world's population decreased by 70%. An alliance of governments around the world immediately formed an organization to combat this virus and ensure safety by identifying the root cause of its occurrence. After research by the World Health Organization, it was stated that the DNA structure of zombies is significantly different from the DNA of an ordinary person. When the infection rate increased significantly and the government did nothing, people began demonstrating in front of the government building to demand a solution to the problem. Thus, more than 200 days have passed since the appearance of the virus, and the zombie ratio has exceeded 70% of the world's population. People could only believe that scientists would soon figure out a way to get rid of this disease. 230 days have passed since Sam was infected. Jane was checking out the necessary products at the checkout in the nearest store, which still had at least some food left. In the first 3 days, she heard on the news that the virus had spread throughout the world. But now that the network is turned off, she cannot find out news from outside. After putting the groceries into a bag, she thanked the former zombie salesman. He only let out an inarticulate wheeze. Jane assumed that other robots ceased functioning after losing their master, or they went somewhere else, continuing the search. In this village of robots, she was the only one left. She was tormented by questions about what the situation was in the outside world, and whether there was a cure for this disease. Suddenly, she heard a scream behind her and turned around. A man she didn't know was running away from zombies. Greg lamented his luck because he was supposed to land on the roof, but the wind picked up at the most inopportune moment. Suddenly, he tripped over the parachute ropes on his back and fell. The zombie decided to take advantage of this opportunity and rushed at his victim. Greg had already prepared himself for the fact that he was about to be bitten and closed his eyes. But when no pain followed after a few seconds of waiting, he opened his eyes, not understanding what had happened. Turning around, he saw that someone was blocking the zombie's path, protecting him. The stranger who saved him took his place, becoming the new victim of a zombie who was about to bite her. The man watched this in horror. He should not have allowed this situation to happen. His mission was a failure before it even began, because the only survivor in this sector would turn into another zombie after some time. Unexpectedly for Greg, the girl turned around and asked if he was okay. Getting up from the ground, he replied that now was not the right time to take care of others. Before it was too late, she should let him examine the bite site to prevent the spread of the virus. Before he could finish speaking, a dozen more zombies approached them. Greg knew they weren't in a winning situation right now. Jane suddenly approached him, having previously apologized for disturbing him. The next moment, she took the man in her arms, holding him as if he weighed almost nothing. Jane rushed past all the zombies surrounding them at lightning speed. Only then did Greg notice her clothes and appearance. He made a mistake at the very beginning, mistaking a domestic robot for a human. In this way, she ran through several streets. Stopping in a safe place, she asked if the man was injured, but he asked to be lowered to the ground. She complied with his request. Greg turned away for a couple of seconds, struggling with embarrassment from the fact that the girl, albeit a robot, was carrying him in her arms. Afterwards, he told her that he was a member of the UN, a junior officer. Jane replied that she was pleased to meet him and also introduced herself. Greg said that they spotted a survivor in the sector from satellite imagery, and that's why he was sent here to help him, and then asked if she knew anything about it. Jane apologized and replied that she did not understand his question. From what he had seen earlier, there were quite a lot of people around. The robot girl began asking a lot of clarifying questions, making the man regret the question he asked earlier. He stopped her, asking her to just take him to her master. When Jane agreed to his request, Greg breathed a sigh of relief. He knew that robots could not recognize zombies as their master. Greg assumed that since this robot was still here, then there was only one person left who was not infected. The man was watching Jane carefully when she suddenly smiled. Greg stopped and asked in surprise if he thought she had just smiled. Jane turned around and answered him with a smile that she was happy now, because 230 days had passed since the guest appeared here. Greg looked at her in bewilderment. He was sure that robots could not smile, much less experience any emotions. A few minutes later, they arrived at Sam's house. Going inside, Jane informed her master that she had returned, after which she walked towards the guy sitting by the canvas, leading Greg behind her. When the man spoke, the hero reacted to the stranger's appearance and turned in their direction. Seeing his face, Greg took a step back in horror. At the same moment, Sam rushed at him. Jane grabbed the guy by the torso, preventing him from attacking the man. She said that this man came here to help them, but the guy did not react to her words, trying to escape from her grip. Greg grabbed the weapon, pointing it at Sam. The man did not understand what this robot was doing. He asked if her original plan was to lure him here and make him zombie food. Jane replied that she understood why he thought this way and asked him to calm down and listen to her. But Greg was not going to listen to her any further and interrupted and said that he would kill this zombie. After his words, Sam's gaze changed. Jane asked that they listen to her first and said that her master would not do anything bad to Greg. Sam understands what she is saying. The man objected that this could not be true. The robot girl reminded him of one of the laws, which clearly states that robots cannot lie to people in any situation. Afterwards, she slowly let the guy go, saying that he would no longer attack. The man watched in surprise as Sam actually stopped trying to attack and just stood there while small tremors ran through his body. A moment later, the guy looked at the man calmly. Confused, Greg hesitantly lowered the gun. A few hours later, the sky began to take on the pink hues of sunset. Happy Jane was setting the table. Greg felt awkward having dinner with the zombie sitting opposite him, who was watching the man with interest. At one point, he turned to Jane, saying that he had never seen a zombie understand someone's words before. He asked if she used any means on the guy, or if she was using some special frequency that only zombies could understand. Jane replied that Sam used to bite her whenever possible. He also could not eat normal food and constantly threw everything around, making a mess. She was reassured by the fact that those infected did not die or become weaker, even if they did not eat. But one day she noticed something strange. Her master began to eat living creatures like rats. Because of his illness, he became more violent, and Jane did not know how to care for him in this condition. But after 3 months, the violent actions decreased, and he gradually began to understand her words. Now Sam can understand simple communication. Stretching out her hands to him, she said that at the moment, she herself did not know why her master's condition was gradually improving. Hugging him, Jane said that she believed that this virus could be destroyed and the affected people healed. Greg listened in amazement to the robot girl's story. She was silent for a couple of seconds, after which she looked up at him, in which some hope was read. This was the first time the man had heard of someone believing that this was just a disease from which one could be cured. He tried to understand the reason why this robot perceives zombies as people. Suddenly, she asked if she could ask Greg one question. Having received his approving nod, Jane asked what the situation was in the outside world. The man replied that the situation outside has not changed much. The number of zombies is constantly increasing. Although scientists are conducting an in-depth study of the virus, they have not been able to make any progress in anything. He said that the government is inactive, and now everyone understands that they are in a hopeless situation, and such a thing as hope has long left them. Jane listened to his story in horror. After a short pause, Greg continued, saying that this was exactly the situation a month ago. But now everything is different. The government has finally presented a plan that can help solve the current situation. Rising from the table, the man said that he couldn't share much at the moment. The only thing he was sure of and what he could promise her was that within 6 months, they would be able to deal with the virus and put an end to it all. He then sat down next to Sam, saying that he was a special case. The man was not sure whether the boy could be healed, but if Jane sent him to a medical laboratory, then there she would definitely be able to get a definite answer. Opening the front door, he promised that as soon as he returned, he would send a rescue team here, so they would only have to wait a little. After his words, Jane bowed, thanking him for his help. When Greg got outside, it was already deep night. Taking out the photo, he was disappointed that there was no survivor here after all. And the one spotted from the satellite turned out to be an ordinary household robot capable of smiling. The current situation might even seem funny to him if it weren't so serious. The call he received distracted him from his thoughts. When Greg answered the call, he was asked to report on the situation. He said that as a result of searches in this sector, no survivors were found. The image they received from the satellite belonged to a domestic robot. At the same time, Jane tried to wash Sam, who tried to resist her, but she smiled and tried to explain to him the importance of this process. Looking up from the report, Greg noticed someone approaching from the side. Noticing his target, the zombie attacked him. But the man reacted faster, and the next moment he shot at the zombie. As he approached, he shot several more times at the dead body. Greg thought for a couple of seconds, remembering today's events. After stepping on the dead zombie's head, he said that there was no more important information worth sharing. The man concluded his report by saying that there was only a defective robot that mistakes zombies for people. After listening to him, the officer said that in this case, they could count it as a violation of the law on robot vagrancy. Then he said that the punitive detachment was currently carrying out a cleanup operation 500 kilometers from this sector. They will immediately be given an order to destroy all monsters in Greg's sector. A couple of moments later, they contacted the commander of the punitive squad, providing the coordinates. Unsuspecting, Jane and Sam were enjoying their time in the bathroom. The next morning, the punitive detachment moved towards its next target. At the same time, Sam was scratching the wall with a stationary knife. Jane, who was cleaning, looked at him excitedly. The hero didn't pay attention to anything, carefully applying new scratches to the wall. At some point, Jane approached him and took the knife, asking him to be careful. When the knife was in her hands, the robot girl decided to pay attention to the wall. Raising her eyes, she froze in amazement for several seconds. Sam scratched her picture on the wall. She turned her gaze to the guy and joyfully asked him if he portrayed her. The hero nodded his head, confirming her guess. Jane looked at the image again with delight. Sometime later, she went to the store. While choosing various objects to draw, the robot girl beamed with happiness because her master had shown interest in something for the first time. It seemed to her that the damaged parts of the brain were beginning to recover, and the disease began to gradually recede. That is why, for the first time, she felt that she was flying home on the wings of happiness. She covered most of the distance by making long jumps. A sudden sound caught her attention. Raising her head up, Jane saw several planes flying past. She thought that this was the same rescue unit that Greg had told her about. But a moment later, scanning the passing plane, she realized that something was wrong. This model is clearly not used as a rescue aircraft. Her eyes widened in surprise as the realization dawned on Jane that they were being used for bombing. A couple of seconds later, the village was attacked and terrifying explosions were heard everywhere. Zombies burned alive in the flames that engulfed everything around them. Jane was thrown aside by the force of the explosion. She hit her face and fell to the ground. Slowly rising, the robot requested access to the database, trying to find out at least something about what was happening now. Sudden gunshots and zombie screams caught her attention, forcing her to turn around. What she saw made her freeze for several moments. Armed robots emerged from the raging flames. Jane recognized the model immediately. These robots have been manufactured for 12 years for the most dangerous military operations. She didn't understand why military robots were sent here, because there were only sick people here. Suddenly, they opened fire. The robots got rid of the zombies without any delay. Jane was confused, because earlier she had been informed about the arrival of a rescue squad, but not a punitive one. She began to analyze all the data she had received since Greg arrived with them. His words about salvation turned out to be a lie. Jane also remembered that the man was collecting information about possible survivors here. She realized what exactly it was. That same countermeasure in relation to solving the problem with the virus. Greg meant by this the complete destruction of the source of infection. Jane realized that her master was in danger. A couple of minutes later, she was approaching their house. Noticing the broken door, her excitement intensified. A moment later, she noticed someone else's footprints left at the front door. Jane ran into the house, hoping Sam wasn't hurt. However, as soon as she was inside, she saw a military robot with a pistol in his hands. Looking at Sam standing against the wall, Jane was convinced that he was alive and unharmed. Then she turned her gaze to the military robot. It was obvious that she had no chance of winning if she went into battle with him. But even realizing this, Jane was obliged to protect her master. The robot girl attacked the enemy, striking him in the head. At the very last moment, the military robot reacted and grabbed her wrist. For a couple of seconds, Jane was grabbed and hung in the air. It took the military robot a couple of moments to identify the model of the robot that attacked him, after which he said that, following the laws, the robotic home must be eliminated. A moment later, the robot attacked Jane, intending to destroy her. At the same moment, the final percentage of her victory was completed, which was only 1,000th. As she fell to the floor, she noticed the frightened expression on Sam's face. Even if her body is torn to pieces, she must protect it. Analyzing everything that had just happened, she remembered that without violating certain articles, the robot could protect itself. At the moment when Jane attacked the military robot, the third section was applied to her. Therefore, her opponent will not rest until she is completely destroyed. She was completely satisfied that the military robot's attention would be focused entirely on her. The next moment, she released her hand from his grip. Then she turned around in the air. Jane strove towards Sam, who was standing opposite the window. When she finally caught up with him, the military robot aimed his weapon at them. But Jane managed to jump through the window with her master, avoiding the bullets. Despite her successful escape, she had suffered severe damage to her chest and energy core a few minutes earlier. If Jane does not receive repairs in the next 8 hours, her functions will stop. But even realizing this, the robot girl was ready to sacrifice everything to help Sam escape. At the same time, the punitive detachment was finishing the bombardment of this sector. The man sitting in the cockpit received information about how their mission was progressing. Suddenly, he received a message that an object was moving at high speed towards the outside of the sector, after which an image was displayed in which Greg recognized the already familiar defective robot. When he was informed that 10 military robots would be sent in pursuit, he said that it was not worth wasting his time on it. Greg intended to deal with this robot himself. A couple of moments later, 2 planes caught up with Jane and Sam. Hearing a noise approaching, she turned around. At the same moment, Greg gave the order to attack her. His order was immediately carried out. Jane was unable to avoid this attack and suffered another injury to her back. She fell to the ground along with her master. Hearing footsteps approaching from behind, Jane turned around. The robot girl was surprised when she again saw the person who had deceived her earlier. Greg, who was standing, told the military robot that they must destroy all the zombies and eliminate objects that interfere with this. Hearing this, Jane looked at him displeased. She already understood that the plan regarding the virus that he told her then was to destroy all those infected. But she did not give up trying to convince the man that the disease could still be cured, judging by the improving condition of its owner. When Jane asked that Sam be shown to the medical team, Greg replied that there was no point. He said that there is no other way to get rid of this virus. After the virus began to spread massively and the government made no attempt, the press began to spread a lot of negative news. Every day, many articles appeared about the predetermined end of the world, and soon fear settled in people. Ultimately, they began to demand the complete destruction of zombies by organizing continuous rallies. The government could not cope with the hostility of the public, and soon they conducted an official survey around the world on whether the complete destruction of zombies would be carried out. According to the results, it was revealed that the overwhelming majority voted for destruction, which is why he does not have the right to leave Sam alive. She said that she still could not understand the reason for such cruelty. Covering the hero with herself, Jane said that the infected are people just like him. The robot girl didn't understand how people could treat others like that. Exhaling cigarette smoke, Greg asked who exactly she meant by people. Without waiting for an obvious answer from her, he said that no one perceives zombies as people. The man explained that these are only animals that spread a deadly disease. After his words, Jane looked at Sam doubtfully. Greg said that she should know about this better than them, because she is a robot. She looked at her master for a few seconds before answering that she really couldn't recognize Sam as a person. Taking the guy by the hand, she continued, saying that this is only a biological problem, but the fact that her owner remains himself does not change. When Jane said that Sam was still her family, he looked at her in surprise. She clearly remembered the words he had once said to her. Lost in her memories, Jane did not notice how the hand of the robot approaching her was slowly reaching out to her. The next moment, a powerful electric discharge ran through her. Greg threw away the half-smoked cigarette. He even felt a little sorry for this domestic robot. He was sure that she would not have met such an end if she had not been so blindly devoted to her master. It was just a false emotion that was put into her. Afterwards, he ordered the robots to continue the further operation. Having given instructions, the man turned around, heading towards his plane. The remaining military robot threw Jane's immobilized body aside and stood in front of Sam, pistol in hand. He aimed the weapon at the guy's head, intending to get rid of him. But he began to try to say something. The hero reached out to Jane, who was lying a couple of steps away from him. But she did not show any signs of life. At the same time, Jane's mind flashed back to Layla telling her to remain family to Sam, no matter how much he would change in the future. She expected that they would face many difficulties in the future. That is why Layla gave her a special power with which Jane had to protect Sam. A few moments later, the robot girl received a notification that the update download was complete. After that, her body rose up and she was engulfed in a golden glow. This caught the attention of Greg, who had already decided that he was done with her. He barely had time to turn around when half the body of a military robot appeared at his feet. Jane managed to deal with the robot that attacked her in the blink of an eye. The stunned man stood there, trying to comprehend what exactly had just happened. The robot girl decided for herself that from now on, anyone who poses a threat to her master must be destroyed. The hero himself looked at her in surprise. The military robots took up a defensive position, holding their weapons at the ready. Jane came to Sam's defense. Greg didn't understand how this was even possible, because just a minute ago she had been taken out of action. Looking at the robot lying in front of him, many questions appeared in his head one after another. Meanwhile, Jane unfastened one of the buttons on her suit. After the mechanism was activated, a protective dome surrounded the guy. When Sam began to panic, not understanding what had happened, she explained that this dome was intended to protect him, and he just needed to wait a little while she dealt with the enemies. Greg ordered the military robots to destroy Jane as quickly as possible, but not even a couple of seconds had passed before their heads were blown off. The shocked man did not even have time to understand what happened. Turning around, he saw Jane standing with the head of one of the military robots in her hand. He was amazed at her speed. Coming to his senses, he asked how this was possible. He couldn't understand how an ordinary robot got so many fighting skills. But she ignored his question, turning in the opposite direction. Then she ran in an unknown direction. According to the data that Jane received, it was established that there were several more squads of military zombies in the center. They have already destroyed almost half of the infected, and they have enough chances to become a threat to its owner. Jane was determined to incapacitate each of them. At some point, the military robot sensed someone approaching from behind and turned around. Jane blew off the head of one of them before the robots had time to react and began to attack her. The next moment, she knocked out another one with a kick. One military robot hid among the ruins and aimed at Jane from a safe distance. A moment later, there was a deafening explosion. The robot was confident that it had gotten rid of its target. Contrary to his expectations, Jane was already above him. She landed directly on him, thereby destroying the enemy's body. Greg at this time received endless messages about losses. He was shocked that an entire battalion was destroyed in 10 minutes by just one faulty house robot. Having gotten rid of all the military robots, Jane headed back to him. Greg commanded that the hangar administrator module be launched. The military, who had set up a camp nearby, received a message from their commander and unlocked hangar number 6. A robot of impressive size appeared from behind the open door, after which he was given an order to eliminate his target. Meanwhile, Jane rushed back to her master. Greg panicked when he noticed her approach. He shouted for the sent robot to hurry up. A couple of moments later, Jane's path was blocked by a new enemy. The man was glad that this robot arrived on time. Even if it is shameful for a robot of his level to fight with some domestic robot, but with his combat power, Greg will be able to get rid of Jane. At the same time, she studied the enemy, trying to discover weak points. The next moment, Jane struck him with a blow that caused his body to shatter into pieces. Greg was once again shocked by what happened. Not believing his eyes, he looked at what was left of the body of his best combat robot. He was brought out of his stupor by Jane's words that her mission was over and 116 robots had been eliminated. Now the man was looking at her in horror. When she started to approach, he shouted at her not to come near him. But seeing that Jane was not reacting to his words, he grabbed the gun. The next moment, Greg pointed the gun at Sam, hoping it would make her stop. But when this action had no effect, he voiced his intention to shoot the guy in the head. Jane just frowned, getting closer and closer with every step. Ultimately, Greg did shoot. But the barrier surrounding Sam did not allow the bullet to reach the guy, and the bullet flew in the opposite direction. The man was unable to dodge, and the bullet went through his thigh. Jane approached her master to remove the barrier. After turning to Greg, who was crumpled in pain, saying that people are afraid of the disease and abandon their fellow men. But she did not intend to act like them and would never give up her family. Turning around, Jane finally said that until the very end, she would look for a way to cure this disease, after which she headed off with Sam in an unknown direction, leaving Greg alone. Looking at the retreating backs, he felt that he was obliged to urgently inform his superiors about everything that had happened here today. A few hours later, Jane and Sam were at the grave. The robot girl thanked Louise for installing a system with which Jane managed to protect her master. She told her that she was going on a trip with Sam. Holding her gaze on the carved name, she continued, saying that they could no longer rely on outside help. Jane will look for a cure for Sam and will definitely cure him. When this happens, they will return here again. So she asked Louise to wait a little longer for them. Then they slowly set off. Along the way, Jane shared that she was thrilled to be traveling with her master for the first time and asked if he felt the same. Sam answered her, trying to express the same emotions. At that moment, she thought about Greg's first reaction when he first saw Sam. He was greatly surprised when he learned that her master was able to understand words. Greg wasn't lying when he said Sam was a special case. According to the data received, she knew that any type of virus accounts for another 1% of all humanity, and it is this 1% that has antibodies to the disease. Jane suggested that Sam was one of these people, and that in the future, he would become an important key in finding a cure. That is why their first task was to find the right person to confirm the presence of antibodies in her master. Suddenly, there was a noise from an airplane above them. Surprised, Jane immediately stopped. The discovery of an escaped zombie and a robot was reported. Jane managed to put a barrier around Sam while she fought the enemies. The robot girl was ready to challenge the whole world to protect her master. 15 days have passed since they left the village. Jane was surprised to find a barricade and they stopped a few meters away from it. It must have taken a lot of time to build something like that, and it was the question of when they managed to do it that haunted her. After scanning the area, Jane learned the location of defensive artillery structures, which are designed to block further advance of the infected. If they got too close to them, it wouldn't end well, so she decided they should go somewhere else. Looking at the sky, Jane assumed that it would start raining soon and they should hurry. A moment later, confirming her thought, the first drop fell from the sky. When they reached the nearest town, it was already pouring rain. Jane covered Sam with rain the whole way, but the rain was too heavy and the umbrella could do little to help them. Leaning over, she told her master that he didn't have to worry, and they would definitely find a place where they could wait out the rain. The guy was pointing his finger somewhere, trying to tell her something. Looking where Sam was pointing, Jane noticed the light of a lantern in one of the houses. She approached and knocked on the glass, asking if anyone was there. But instead of answering, the barrel of a gun appeared from behind the broken glass. A red-haired girl appeared and asked who the uninvited guests were. Jane said that she is a domestic robot and the girl need not be afraid of them. The owner of the gun was surprised that there were still robots in the area. Jane replied that she and her master were currently in the middle of a journey and saw a light here while passing by. When the hero raised his head, Maria drew attention to his eyes and pointed the gun at him. She asked Jane why she was dragging zombies around with her. The robot girl covered Sam with herself, answering that he was safe for others and did not attack anyone. But Maria fired a bullet at Jane, not allowing her to finish. She warned that if they came closer, she would definitely shoot again. Finally, the girl advised to get rid of this zombie as soon as possible. After her words, Jane's gaze filled with sadness. Sam was worried about her and reached out with his hand to the injured forehead of his only family member. Smiling, she said that she was fine and that this damage would be repaired automatically within 10 minutes. Moving away from this house, Jane took a last look at it. She had the opportunity to personally verify that people were really very afraid of the infected, but she could not leave everything as it was. Maria's younger sister excitedly asked if her sister had killed that girl, but she replied that it was a robot and it was impossible to kill her with a regular gun. When Anya said that Maria shot the robot in the head, the girl hesitantly replied that she only wanted to fire a warning shot and did not intend to intentionally hit her. Anya, no less worried, asked what they would do if the robot nevertheless presented them with the fact that she had been shot in the head. Maria, who was shooting for the first time in her life, was surprised by the strong recoil from the weapon she had previously selected. Looking out the window, the younger sister looked at the retreating backs, saying that she felt sorry for them. The girl handed Anya a chocolate bar, saying that now was not the best time to worry about others, but Anya replied that she was not hungry and Maria should eat it herself. But she insisted, saying that Anya had not eaten anything since yesterday. Her younger sister crossed her arms over her chest, answering that Maria herself had not eaten for 3 days. Thus they argued for some time. They were interrupted by Jane reappearing. Maria immediately grabbed her gun and pointed the gun at her and asked why she was here again. The robot girl raised her hands asking to be listened to. After that, she picked up a large box of food, saying that she couldn't pass by and decided to help them by collecting some food from the nearby market. Seeing this, the sisters could no longer think about anything other than the food in front of them. At this time, the sisters were enthusiastically gobbling up food on both cheeks. Anya thanked Jane with tears in her eyes, saying that they had not been able to eat properly for several days. She smiled and replied that there was still a lot of food left, and if they wanted something else, they could say so at any time. Drawing attention to Sam, who was standing with his back to them, the girl asked why he did not eat with them. Jane replied that he was sick and could not eat normal food at the moment. Frowning, Maria asked if she was planning to fatten them up so that she could later feed them to her master. Jane assured her that this was not the case. Anya did not take her interested gaze off Sam. She walked over and touched his back, getting his attention. A couple of seconds later, the surprised hero turned to her. Anya could not hide her joy. Her sister immediately jumped up from her seat, telling the girl to immediately move away from him. But she ignored her and, shaking Sam's hand, offered friendship. The guy hummed uncertainly. Alarmed, Maria repeated her request again, but in a more insistent voice. Dissatisfied, Anya turned to her sister, reminding her that Sam was not dangerous, then asked him if he would eat her. He shook his head negatively. The girl smiled happily, saying that he was friendly. Maria could hardly contain her emotions when her sister suggested how nice it would be if other zombies were like Sam and their mother remained alive. At dawn, the rain finally stopped. The zombies were still wandering around aimlessly. For the first time in a long time, Anya was able to sleep peacefully without nightmares. Maria patted her sister on the head and thanked Jane for her help. Smiling, she replied that she was also grateful to them, because it was the first time that her master looked like his former self. Removing her hand from Anya's hair, the girl asked Jane and Sam to leave them as soon as possible, causing the surprise of her guest. Taking a photo from the shelf, Maria explained that she was very worried about Sam being a zombie. She said that 2 months ago their neighbor also became infected. Ultimately, their mother died. One morning, the woman left the house to find food for them. But not even a couple of minutes had passed before zombies surrounded her and ate her alive. Maria watched this with tears in her eyes. She could not even go out to help her mother. Clutching the photo to herself, the girl said that Anya was sleeping at that time and did not see that tragic scene. But Maria could not cope with her hatred of zombies. Then she repeated her request that they leave this house. Bowing her head, Jane replied that being a robot, she had no right to refuse a person. But before leaving, she asked Maria if she would like to listen to some interesting information. The interested girl asked what exactly the robot wanted to tell her. Jane said that if they went west, about 20 kilometers from here, they could find a barricade built by people, and there Maria and her sister could get help. She also said that she could take them there. It was difficult for the girl to believe her words. She replied that everything outside was crowded with zombies, and they would not be able to overcome such a long distance in such a situation. Jane just smiled, saying that she already had everything she needed to get to that place. Zombies wandered along one of the streets of the city, hoping to find a new victim. A sudden sound caught their attention and made them turn around. A moment later, a truck drove past them. Maria, clutching her sister in her arms, shouted at Jane to drive at a slower speed. But she replied that they should hold on even tighter, because she intended to increase the speed. Thus, the truck rushed through numerous streets. Maria asked if everything would really be fine. Jane told her that she had calculated everything and there was no reason to worry. The robot girl turned to her and smiled, asking her to trust her. Suddenly, Maria pointed in front of her and shouted for Jane to look ahead. A lot of zombies were moving towards the truck. Jane told everyone to hold tight. The next moment, the truck increased its speed. The sisters, not used to this, screamed in horror. They rushed through the crowd of zombies with lightning speed. The zombies did not have time to react to the truck flying past them. Thus, they left there unharmed. Anya looked at Jane with admiration, saying that she drives a car very cool. Sometime later, they left the city. What Jane saw the next moment made her wary. The highway was strewn with cars that had driven into each other, with zombies wandering among them. Jane analyzed the situation and realized that there was not enough space on the road for them to pass safely. Maria told the robot girl to step on the gas and drive without stopping. She had no intention of sparing the monsters that ate people. Seeing that Jane was not reacting to her words, Maria ordered her to shoot down everyone who got in the way of the zombies. She did not move for a couple of seconds, wondering whether to carry out this order. Then she pressed the gas pedal. The truck was heading straight towards a crowd of zombies. Maria, overcome with rage, screamed for Jane to kill them all. But suddenly the truck changed its direction, turning to the side. A moment later, they broke through the guardrail, driving off the highway. The frightened sisters screamed in horror. Jane moved along the lumpy surface, leading them further away from the zombies. Dissatisfied, Maria asked why she did not follow her order. Apologizing, the robot girl replied that she could not follow orders that violated established laws. She recalled that according to the first article of the first law, robots cannot harm humans. When Maria objected that zombies were no longer people, Jane replied that no matter how much they had changed, to her, they were still people who needed help. Jane understood that the girl held a grudge against the infected people, but they were not to blame for being exposed to this disease. These people were only victims of one accident. After her words, Maria's gaze filled with rage again. The girl was angry that Jane had written off everything as just a simple accident. At the same moment, the truck turned, entering the road leading past another town. Maria barely held back her tears and said that she could not come to terms with the fact that their mother died due to some accident. She reached out to Jane to get some answers from her about what had happened. But suddenly a zombie appeared in front of them, attracting their attention. Jane began to twist the steering wheel to avoid hitting the zombies. Suddenly, the truck ran over a huge rock. A moment later, he tilted dangerously, freezing near the zombie. But not even a couple of seconds had passed before the truck turned over with a terrible roar and fell on its side. Those sitting inside were thrown aside. The zombies gradually began to surround the car, feeling their victims inside. When Maria opened her eyes, they saw through the glass many faces of monsters surrounding them. They did not give up their attempts to reach the victims. Assessing the situation, Jane asked the sisters to remain calm, but Maria interrupted her, saying that if she had followed her order, then this would not have happened. She doesn't care why these people became zombies. All that matters now is that they are monsters who eat other people. If they don't get rid of them, they will eventually become the same themselves. Sitting Sam back down, Jane replied that it was for this reason that she was looking for a cure for her master. Maria looked at her with confusion. The robot girl explained that if she manages to find a cure for this virus, then no one else will suffer. But Maria only laughed sadly, saying that these were just stupid hopes. Afterwards, Jane turned to her master with a request. She asked if he could protect the sisters for 8 minutes. Sam nodded his head affirmatively. After receiving his answer, Jane climbed out of the truck and rushed through the crowd. The zombies gathered at the entrance tried to get inside. Maria and Anya experienced real horror. The hero began to growl and push other zombies away. The girl was surprised that Sam was really trying to protect them. Suddenly, the truck began to rise. The girl screamed in fear again, and the surprised guy tried not to fall out of the front window. Jane managed to turn the truck over and lift it, thereby protecting her charges from the zombies. She shouted at Maria to fasten everyone's seatbelt. The girl, not understanding anything, sat looking around. Anya quickly came to her senses and fulfilled Jane's request, fastening Sam. The next moment, the truck was thrown over the top. Anya looked out the window in surprise. The truck hovered in the air, covering a long distance. Jane followed them along the ground. When the truck began to descend, she jumped up towards the truck. A few seconds later, Jane caught up with the truck. She supported the truck, softening its landing. The girls screamed in horror again, feeling that they were starting to fall. Having touched the ground, Jane tried to brake, still holding the truck. A few seconds later, she finally managed to stop. At the same time, behind the walls of the barricade, people did not stop monitoring the situation around them. Having received an urgent report, one of the employees actively knocked on the door of his boss's office, waiting for permission to enter. A few moments later, the man gave permission to enter, without raising his head from the numerous documents that littered his desk. When Justin asked what was going on, he was informed about the received surveillance images. His hand froze, pen in hand, right above the document when he heard a truck approaching the barricade, which belonged to a survivor from the contaminated area. Putting his pen aside, Justin reached for his glasses to take them off. He was interested in this survivor he had just been informed about. Jane got behind the wheel again, and now they continued on their way without obstacles in the form of zombies. She broke the silence in the car by turning to Maria. She turned away when Jane asked if Maria was angry with her. But then she turned around and replied that they all almost died, and Jane should have warned about what she was going to do. Anya interrupted her sister and smiled and said that she enjoyed it, as if they were riding a roller coaster. A few minutes later, a barricade finally appeared in front of them. Jane told her sisters that they were almost to the point where they could help them. When Anya pointed to the wall and asked what it was, Maria replied that it was the place where the soldiers were who could protect them. She said the days of sitting cooped up, afraid to go outside, and sharing leftover food would finally end. Anya looked at her sister with delight, asking if she could go to school now. The girl smiled and nodded, answering that now they can live the same way as before. Suddenly, they ran over something that made an unpleasant squeaking sound. The next moment, the sisters saw a bright light. The truck hit a mine and flew into the air. Trying to think of a way out of the situation, Jane knocked down the door on her side. She managed to get out of the truck, along with her master and two sisters, before the vehicle hit the ground. Jane landed on the ground, preventing her charges from getting hurt. Afterwards, she excitedly asked if everything was okay. Maria replied that she was fine. She was only hurt a little. The robot girl realized that they had run into a hidden mine. She looked around, scanning the area around her, and saw many mines located throughout the area. A sudden scream distracted her from further inspection. Maria, with tears in her eyes, bent over her unconscious sister, asking her to wake up. Seeing this, Jane ran up to them. The girl asked her what they should do now, but she asked Maria not to shake Anya and let her examine the wounds. Metal fragments reached the girl's stomach, making the situation much more dangerous. Turning towards the structure, Jane said that she would try to contact the people at the barricade, because there should be a doctor there. As soon as she said this, a bullet flew a centimeter away from her. After that, they were told through loudspeakers that they should all leave. If they dared to come closer, fire would be opened. Hearing this, Jane stood up, shielding her master and the girls. She asked not to shoot, because these people were survivors, and one of them needed the help of a doctor. She was told that this announcement was for temporary beings. Justin reported that a few months ago, one survivor had already been rescued, but in the end he was infected, and a couple of days later, an incident occurred that contributed to the rest of the surrounding areas being infected. It was from that day that the government established that all people in the affected areas would be marked as temporary beings, so now they have no right to let them in. Maria couldn't believe what she heard. She didn't want to believe that they had come such a long way in vain, risking their lives. She was filled with resentment, anger, and despair. Suddenly, she screamed for them to be let in, because it was too inhumane to do this to them. Observing this, Justin forbade calling anyone from the infected area survivors and treating them the same way they treat zombies. If they approached, it was ordered to open fire immediately. Suddenly, he was informed that a large number of zombies were approaching the barricade. Zombies flocked to the sound of an exploding mine that attracted them. It was established that they came from neighboring sectors. Justin immediately ordered everyone to take up fighting positions and be ready to fight. At the same time, Sam and Jane turned towards the approaching zombies. What was happening was completely beyond Jane's calculations. She could not believe that the soldiers would really leave them like that. Having regained her composure, she turned to Maria, saying that they needed to get out of here as soon as possible. In a quiet voice, the girl asked what would happen after they escaped from here. She had no idea where to go when zombies were roaming everywhere, and those who could help them refused to do so. Jane tried to calm her down, but the girl interrupted her, saying that everything they do is useless and they will all die in the end. The robot girl decided to bring her to her senses, reminding her of Anya's condition. If she does not receive help in time, she will definitely die. Hearing her name, the girl turned her head towards Jane, who was speaking. The zombie got dangerously close to her, but she did not notice this, expecting at least some reaction from Maria to her words. When two more zombies appeared behind her, Sam ran up to Jane, pushing them back. The robot girl shouted to Maria that she and her master would detain the zombies, so she should take her sister and run. Anya's eyes gradually lost their shine, but she looked at only one point. Suddenly, she asked her sister to turn around and look ahead. Maria hesitantly turned her head, looking where her sister was looking. The next moment, she froze in shock. Among the crowd of zombies, the girl saw her mother. Maria could not believe that in front of her was really her mother, who died before her eyes on that ill-fated day. The sisters froze, looking only at the figure approaching them. Suddenly, Anya smiled, saying that their mother had finally returned to pick them up. Overjoyed, the girl slowly rose to her feet. Maria came to her senses only when her sister headed towards the zombies. She screamed, trying to stop her, but Anya did not hear her and slowly walked into the deadly arms of her mother. She was really happy to see her mother, whom she had missed so much all this time. The girl did not see her as a threat until recently, even when the woman bared her sharpened teeth, leaning towards her neck. Maria screamed with all her might for her sister to leave there, realizing the danger looming over her. But it was too late, because the next moment their mother's teeth closed on Anya's neck, digging deep into her body. Seeing this, Maria, overcome with horror, jumped up from her seat and ran to her sister. At this moment, Jane turned her attention away from the zombie, looking back towards her sisters. She saw several more zombies approaching Anna. Jane immediately rushed to the girl's aid. A couple of seconds later, she was already holding back the pressure of the infected, who were attracted by the smell of blood, while Maria approached her sister. Kneeling down next to her mother, the girl tried to pull her away from Anya. She hoped that the woman would hear her words and stop. The girl tried to explain to her that now her own daughter was in front of her. But seeing that there was no reaction to her words, Maria broke into a scream and, with tears in her eyes, begged her to stop. But her mother only began to bite into Anya's neck more furiously. At that moment, the girl realized that by trying to reach her mother, she was only wasting time. Maria reached for the gun, which was not far from her. After that, she pointed the weapon at the woman's head. The girl screamed with tears in her eyes for you to go away. Other zombies were once again defeated in their attempts to reach their victims. Jane and Sam couldn't let them get to Anya and Maria. Suddenly, she heard Maria's screams. Turning around, Jane found a terrible scene. She saw Maria pointing a gun at her own mother, threatening to shoot if she didn't leave. At the same time, Justin was informed about the successful preparations for the attack. A couple of moments later, one of the girls told him that everyone was only waiting for his order. Justin watched what was happening and said that they needed to wait a little longer. He was interested in how the current situation would end. Maria's attention was attracted by Anya, who said that their mother had finally returned. But she replied that now it was not their mother, but a monster devouring people. Anya did not hear her sister's words, saying that she no longer hoped to ever see her again. Maria listened to her sister in bewilderment. When Anya turned to her sister, one of her eyes changed color to red, and red marks were spreading across her body. The girl seemed surprised to hear Anya say that despite everything, their mother was not a monster. She remembered Jane's words that all those infected were only victims of the current situation. Then Maria herself answered her that if they did not get rid of the zombies, they themselves would die. But Jane, no matter what, did not intend to give up trying to find a cure. Having rethought everything that had happened, the girl could not hold back her tears. She threw the weapon aside. After that, the girl called Jane and Sam. When the robot girl holding back the zombies turned around, Maria asked if she still intended to continue searching for a cure if Jane managed to find one. Then the girl asked to cure her family one day. Then she knelt down and hugged her sister and mother. Jane looked at this picture with sadness. A moment later, she promised that she would definitely heal them. Maria just looked at her gratefully and nodded. By this point, the virus had completely seized control of Anya's body. The girl reached for her sister's neck, intending to bite her. But at that very second, they were attacked from the barricade. Jane watched this, not having time to understand what had just happened. At the same time, the military reported that most of the zombies were within range of their weapons. A moment later, all the cannons installed around the perimeter were aimed at the crowd of zombies. At Justin's command, fire was opened and many zombies were hit. Sam dropped to his knees and, screaming, reached for the place where Maria and Anya had been a few seconds ago. The hero could not accept that his friends were destroyed in such a cruel way. Suddenly, Jane's protective dome appeared in front of him. The guy looked at her in surprise. He watched as she stepped forward, standing in the midst of many explosions from gunfire. Suddenly, one of the cannons aimed at her. At the same time, in the command center, Justin gave orders to his subordinates. He considered himself extremely lucky that these children had come to them, dragging a whole crowd of zombies with them, providing the perfect opportunity to get rid of them all in one fell swoop. The man suggested that at this rate, this area could be cleared much faster than they expected. Suddenly, alarms rang throughout the command center, and the color of the lights changed to a dull red. Justin asked what caused the alarm to activate, but the exact reason was not determined. A couple of moments later, he was informed that a very strong release of energy had occurred on the front line. The man asked to show him the camera footage. An image was immediately displayed on the screen, informing them that something was approaching them at great speed. By enlarging the image, everyone saw that it was just a domestic robot. At the same time, the man was conducting a report, reporting all the collected information to his superiors. One day, an ordinary household robot suddenly changed. And in just a couple of minutes, Jane was able to destroy an entire battalion of soldiers. After this, the 93rd Division sent military forces to get rid of it, but they were all defeated. Kevin reported that they asked a company that made home robots for advice, but they replied that they had never loaded this kind of ability into their robots. The man came to the conclusion that this robot is an updated custom model. It was also known that the place where she was last seen was the Western Barrier Point. It was there that Jane showed amazing abilities. She rushed forward through many explosions. Justin watched this in bewilderment, not understanding what this robot was doing. Suddenly, she began to gather all her strength into her fist. Jane was about to deliver a devastating blow. Approaching the wall, she hit it with her fist. From her blow, many cracks immediately appeared on the wall. A moment later, the cracks deepened, passing right through the wall. As a result of this blow, the headquarters shook, causing panic among everyone present. Justin ordered everyone to take refuge in an underground bunker. At the same time, the wall in front of Jane began to crumble. A couple of minutes later, the barricade collapsed, allowing her entry. Suddenly, she received requests for a video connection. After accepting the request, an image of an angry Justin appeared. He said that this barrier was the largest line of defense protecting the western region of the European district, and then asked Jane if she realized what its destruction would lead to. Without waiting for her answer, the man said that with such actions, she would put millions of people's lives in danger. Since this fact was a clear violation of the robot law, Justin ordered her to immediately switch off and stop functioning. But she replied that, like people, she simply protects what is valuable to her. Jane was determined to protect her master, even if she had to resort to such violations. Having said this, she ended the call and the image of the man disappeared. Afterwards, Jane approached her master to remove the protective dome. Helping him up, she told him they needed to move on. After looking around, the robot girl came to the conclusion that from now on this problem concerns not only them. And time after time, wherever they go, the same thing that happened to Maria and Anna will happen again and again. To put an end to this, Jane decided that she had to find a cure. Looking at the footage of her destroying an entire wall with just one blow, he said that this was far from an ordinary robot. They would view Jane as a weapon that openly opposed humanity. The man suggested sending several elite soldiers and getting rid of the upcoming threat in her person. The woman who listened to him replied that it was all quite interesting. She decided that they would stick to the strategy of the hunter watching his prey, so the operation to capture Jane would be too boring. At least a small problem would have to arise for the situation to become interesting. After that, she frowned and asked why she received all this data only now. Standing in front of her, Greg and his boss realized their mistake. The man, who is the commander of the 93rd Division of the Emergency Army, replied that they considered the matter to be a trifle for this report. Then he hesitated, and carefully choosing his words so as not to anger the girl even more, he said that this robot turned out to be a special case. After the situation had cleared up a little, they were going to provide a report, but were late due to scrupulousness. Listening to him, the girl raised her index finger. The next moment, Kevin received a bullet in the head. The shooter, Justin, said that the man missed his chance to survive. He hid because he was ashamed of being wounded by an ordinary house robot. If Kevin had immediately admitted this, he would only have received a demotion. Rising from her seat, Katarina said that this is only a problem for the military. If there are any problems, they should only think about the solution and not be busy, leaving the problems unnoticed. But she did not intend to tolerate their inaction any longer. Justin turned to her, asking what they should do with the sensational robot. She waved him off, answering that he should leave everything as it was for now. She didn't care about some kind of pile of scrap metal there. She then turned her attention to Greg, asking if he was the operational commander in the 315th sector. The excited man replied that he was an intelligence officer of the 93rd Division. She was interested in his words when he said that immediately after that incident, he reported this to the commander. But he said that it was a disgrace to their honor, and they should deal with this robot on their own. Interrupting him, Katarina lifted his chin, saying that Greg's face was too reserved, although his hair was a little messy. Afterwards, she displayed an image on the screen with a guy and a robot already familiar to him, and ordered him to tell about everything in detail that he managed to find out about this couple last time. Katarina placed special emphasis on Sam. She was interested in this boy, who, although he was a zombie, behaved completely differently than his other relatives. After many days, Jane continued to search for information about a medicine that could cure the infected. But no matter how much she searched, the information she needed related to this virus was nowhere to be found. One day she found one of the articles, the content of which she found difficult to believe. Currently, he and Sam were moving through the forest to their next destination. Jane helped wash her master, but he, as usual, actively resisted this process. She asked him not to twitch, because they found the river after many difficulties, and he must at least wash himself. Jane couldn't understand why Sam began to hate water so much after he became infected. After they broke through the barricade, about 20 days passed. They immediately went to the medical district to find a doctor who specialized in this virus, but it was completely turned into ruins. After that, they went on a search to another sector of the CDC to find at least some information. But here, Jane could not find any records related to the virus. She checked all the archives of the center, but there was no information left there. Jane assumed that someone had deliberately deleted all important data. Now she didn't know what exactly she needed to do. Having washed her master with difficulty, Jane collected her things and finally looked around. She noticed that after the disease appeared, the environment became better. Suddenly, her attention was caught by something flashing in the water. She did not understand why the water in the stream became cloudy. Turning her attention to the opposite bank, Jane noticed that someone was caressing clothes here. Taking a closer look, she noticed that it was a girl in a uniform resembling a medic. Erica noticed someone's presence. She looked up and saw Jane and Sam. At the same moment, she managed to confirm the model of the stranger. She established that this girl was a medical care robot. She also examined the uninvited guests carefully. A couple of moments later, she gathered her things and ran away from the river. Jane couldn't let someone connected to the CDC get away so easily, so she grabbed Sam and chased after the stranger. She hoped that this robot would have useful information about the virus for her. After several minutes of chasing, Jane ended up at someone's house. The robot girl stopped and put Sam on the ground, saying that their goal must be somewhere in this place. She opened the door of the house, asking if anyone was inside. But instead of answering, Jane heard the roar of zombies. An unfamiliar silhouette hanging over the screaming zombie asked him to lie still and not twitch. Sam and Jane watched this scene in surprise. Suddenly, the stranger felt someone else's presence in his house. Raising his head towards the guests, he irritably asked what they wanted here. Jane hugged the trembling master, trying to think of an appropriate response. The stranger's gaze lingered on the hero. Then he asked, still looking at Sam, if he had become infected with the virus that turns him into a zombie. Approaching them, the woman said that he was different from the others and asked permission to take a closer look at him. Jane looked at the approaching man in surprise, trying to get information about this woman. She was lucky that the woman's biography was registered in a central database that she could access. Suddenly, someone hit Jane on the back of the head with a hammer. When she turned around to find out who her offender was, she saw the girl she had met earlier. Jane said they had no bad intentions. They just wanted to ask something. After her words, the woman told Erica to stop torturing the guest. She concluded that they had nothing to do with the military. Having said this, Clarice asked to bring her a sedative. Jane turned to her master, saying that he need not worry, and the man standing in front of them was a doctor. She also added that this woman was the one who left a deep mark on history, achieving unprecedented achievements in medicine. A few hours later, it was already getting dark. Erica escorted a zombie whom Clarice had previously treated. The woman said that he hit his head on a rock on the bank of a stream, so she performed emergency surgery on him to repair a brain hemorrhage. The woman complained that due to the lack of antibiotics, she could not perform full-fledged operations, but since he was infected with a virus, he would survive without any medications. Taking a break from her story, Clarice again asked Jane why they had come to her. The robot girl replied that she was a house robot, and behind her was her master. She was glad that she happened to run into Clarice. The woman was surprised when the guest said her full name and previous position. When she asked in surprise how Jane knew her, she replied that she had found the information she needed in the central database. A few moments later, she brought up the image and read that Clarice had previously developed several vaccines for 10 infectious diseases as an expert in epidemiography and bacteriology. After which she hid the image and admitted that she did not even expect to meet the president of the medical association in such a place. The woman said doomedly that the robot's facial recognition system was still terrifying, even though her current image was very different from her previous one. After which she turned to Jane, suggesting that she had a lot of questions. Taking the liberty, she voiced the question that Jane thinks about most often, namely, why Sam manages to think straight and whether there is a way to recover from the virus. The robot girl looked at Clarice enthusiastically and confirmed her guess, saying that she was indeed looking for a cure. Jane shared the assumption that her owner has antibodies to the virus, and if Clarice can study it, then more accurate information about this can be found out. After listening to her, the woman scratched her head thoughtfully. Afterwards, she said that Jane should just give up because there is no way to cure this virus. The woman explained that this virus is not a disease. Jane was surprised to hear something like that and asked what it was. Clarice exhaled heavily. The robot girl said that they had come a long way here and asked the woman to tell everything she knew. At the same time, Katerina was drinking tea on board her ship. She praised the aroma of the tea, saying it suited her perfectly. Greg, who became her secretary, hesitantly turned to Katerina. He said that 2 days had already passed since she took the command ship for a sortie and recalled that Kevin asked her to tell him their destination from time to time. When the girl asked what the point of their appointment was if they couldn't enjoy a cup of tea without looking back, Greg asked what they would do if she was reprimanded. Katerina exhaled tiredly and said that he was saying very strange things after she saved Greg from being shot. Then she took off her glasses and looked at him irritably, asking a question about who, in his opinion, would dare to reprimand her. Then she exhaled and asked her to tell Kevin to just be on guard until he received his orders. Suddenly, she saw something in the glasses that caught her attention. Looking closer, she saw the same robot girl and her owner in the company of Clarice. Katerina was glad that they had finally made contact. At the same time, Clarice talked about how the virus is not a disease, but an evolution. Surprised, Jane asked what this was supposed to mean. The woman replied that it was similar to how a monkey evolved into a human. She explained that initially evolution would have taken 250,000 years, but now, due to some external interference, people are in a state of rapid development. Unreasonable aggression, loss of sanity, and increased physical capabilities are a few distinctive characteristics that appear only in the infected. But the most remarkable characteristic among all is that the infected can survive even without food. Based on the results of the research, it was established that zombies are superior to humans. Their cells are still in the process of dividing. Even if they do not eat, the infected continue to live. They do not attack humans because of their natural instinct to increase their species. Ultimately, Clarice came to the conclusion that curing this virus would be akin to turning a human into an ape. She explained that the reason Sam is able to maintain a modicum of sanity is not because he has antibodies, but rather he is simply a mutant. That's why Clarice said Jane should give up. Afterwards, the woman headed back to the house, saying that she should know the procedure for exterminating the infected around the world, and using this information, she should take Sam and hide, continuing to live where no one would find them. This is the best that Jane can do for her master. After listening to her, the robot girl suggested that perhaps this virus should be studied not from the side of pathology, but from genetic engineering and biotechnology. Jane said that they would head to the best research institute in Sector 23. After that, she bowed, thanking Clarice for the useful information. The woman asked her in bewilderment if she really was a robot, and if she was really not capable of doing calculations. Jane replied that she had checked everything several times since the beginning of their journey. She agreed that the probability of success was almost zero, and there was no way for an ordinary robot like her to do something that even a doctor like Clarice couldn't do. But Jane was not going to give up so easily, because she is the only family Sam has. Smiling sadly, she said that the best thing she can do now is not to hide, but to find hope. After her words, Clarice remembered her past when she was still working in the laboratory. One of her colleagues said that they are obliged to announce that the evolution of humanity is now happening, and they cannot correct it no matter what. But Clarice objected. They could not stop there, because this is where the best doctors from all over the world are gathered, and if they give up, then millions of people are doomed. Hearing her words, other workers came up, saying that if it was said that something was impossible, then that meant that it was impossible, period. None of her colleagues supported her. Clarice realized that she could not convince such a large number of people alone. Taking off her ID cards, she was informed that the result of the popular vote had been announced, and 97% supported the idea of a U-200 boy, U-200 be killing the zombies. Eventually, everyone left, leaving Clarice alone. Remembering this, the woman laughed. She said that a robot that truly cares about its owner should really be like that. Clarice apologized for her callousness, saying that she really wanted to see such determination again. Then she invited Jane to come inside, intending to show her something interesting. The robot girl followed Clarice along with her master. Entering the next room, they went down to the basement. Opening the door, the women entered her laboratory. Jane was surprised to see something like this here. The computers displayed information about numerous experiments, but they all failed. Jane studied everything in amazement. The woman said that she also thought that in order to defeat this virus, it needs to be studied through genetic engineering. She was not sure whether it was possible to change the genetic factor, but if she managed to revive the stopped brain using genetic treatment, then it would be possible to restore intelligence to the infected. The woman was confident that if their intelligence returned, then the infected would not be treated like pests. Patting Sam on the head, Clarice said that he could help her achieve this goal. She then turned to Jane, asking if she would trust her with her master. Seeing the doubt on her face, Clarice said that this child was the key that would help her complete her research. She assured Jane that she would definitely succeed and restore Sam's sanity. Having received her approval, the woman asked Erica to conduct a thorough examination of the guy. Encouraged, Jane asked Erica to take care of her master. She nodded and went to perform her duties. Seeing Jane's confusion, Clarice informed her that Erica's language system was broken, so she could not speak, and her expression of emotions was also severely limited. Then she headed towards the exit, calling Jane with her. Erica carefully watched her every step. As soon as she took Sam behind the screen, she immediately pounced on him, squeezing her fingers at his neck. She watched as the hero began to choke. A few moments later, Erica opened her fingers, letting go of Sam. As soon as he regained the ability to breathe, he began to gasp for air. With her head down, Erica stood over the guy like that for some time. Suddenly, she said something quietly, but Sam did not hear and looked at her in confusion. Raising her head, Erica repeated, telling them to get out of here. A week has already passed since that day. All this time, Clarice gave Sam her full attention. Every time Erica walked past him, he shuddered and looked at her fearfully. After several studies, Clarice said that Sam currently has the intelligence of a child of 6 years old. The suspected cause was determined to be that it has a genetic factor that can suppress evolved cells. Erica also made another discovery that amazed them all. She saw the possibility of a complete cure for the virus. Jane was happy because the chances of her dream coming true had increased significantly. When she approached the house, Sam came out at the same moment. Approaching, she said that today's inspection ended surprisingly quickly. But when Sam raised his head, she saw blood on his face. She immediately ran into the house and headed to the laboratory to find out what happened there. Jane covered the distance in the blink of an eye and burst inside. At that moment, she saw Erica supporting Clarissa lying on the floor, near whom there was a pool of blood. Jane ran up to them, asking what happened. Seeing the woman's face, she saw the familiar stripes gradually spreading throughout her body. The robot girl realized with horror that Clarice was infected. Sometime later, they moved her to the bed, after which Erica put on an IV, and Jane carefully wiped off the blood. Breaking the silence, she asked when Clarice started getting infected. She was worried that it might have happened because of her and Sam. Hearing an incomprehensible sound in response, Jane turned towards Erica. A moment later, tuning into another wavelength, Jane was able to understand these signals. Erica said that Clarice had been infected about 70 days ago. The woman did not want to give up her research and continued to conduct it, suppressing the infection with incomplete treatment. But even so, she has already reached her limit. Suddenly, Erica asked her and Sam to leave soon, to give Clarice the opportunity to rest at least the time she had left. Jane hung her head sadly as she thought about her words. Afterwards, she said that she understood the current situation, and it would really be wrong if they continued to stay here. Having said this, she and Sam bowed, Jane thanking them for their help. Suddenly, Clarice grabbed Sam's hand. Jane looked in surprise at the awakened woman, who was struggling to get into a sitting position. Clarice said that she was finally able to find the right path in research and asked where they were going to go. Then she collapsed back exhausted. It was obvious that the woman was in great pain. Reaching out to Erica, Clarissa said that she wanted to continue her research and asked her to help her get up. But she did not budge. The woman repeated her request again, but more demandingly. But Erica again ignored her request. Exhaling in disappointment, she said that she had been wandering in the dark for a long time, conducting numerous studies. She admitted that she was ready to give up many times. But one day Sam appeared, and for Clarice, he became the last hope. She looked at Erica, saying that right now she had unfinished business that was much more important than her life. Clarice again asked to help her get to the laboratory. But Erica again had no intention of complying with this request, so Jane decided to do it instead. The woman thanked her for her help. She just shook her head, looking at her with regret. Erica was unhappy with this action of Jane. When they were alone, she gave her a hard slap. Jane said that she was well aware of the reason for Erica's anger. She said that it was not her selfishness in favor of her master. Jane helped Clarice because she understands what she was experiencing all this time. Jane assumed that Clarice was very upset by the constant failures, and she was also under the stress of being infected. The robot girl said that she knows too well how difficult it is to fight against everyone alone. She was confident that Clarice would not stop, no matter what difficulties stood in her way. Jane said that if they could see just a glimmer of hope, they would both move forward no matter what. That's why Erica won't be able to hold them back. She looked at Jane in surprise. When she finished speaking, Erica lowered her head, biting her lip. The next moment, she said that Jane knew absolutely nothing. She asked what kind of end people like them would face. Jane froze in surprise. Clarice talked about how Erica's language system was broken, and she couldn't speak. Jane asked why she had been hiding her ability to speak all this time. Erica just looked at her with hostility. At the same time, Clarice injected herself with an injection that could briefly delay the spread of the virus in her body. Once the medicine was administered, she sighed heavily and leaned back in her chair. The system informed her of the results of another experiment on cerebral gene activation. The woman couldn't believe her own eyes when she personally read the results. Suddenly, Erica received a signal and was distracted from her conversation with Jane. Then, clutching her head, she quietly said that this should not have happened. Jane didn't understand when Erica suddenly rushed back into the house. She followed her, trying to find out the reason for her strange behavior. Once inside, the girl saw Clarice, overcome by another coughing fit, and Sam standing next to her. They approached her, asking if everything was okay. But instead of answering, Clarice took her hand away from her mouth and pointed at the monitor. The girl sitting next to her froze and looked at the monitor in surprise. The last experiment carried out was successful. Jane was incredibly happy because she had a chance to heal her master. Eliza was also amazed that Clarice still managed to accomplish what had recently seemed impossible. The woman looked at Sam, saying that all the answers to what was happening were in him. She thanked him. Then she said that her time was coming to an end. Clarice reached out to Erica, saying she wanted to ask her for one thing. But she looked at the monitor, not paying attention to those around her. The woman called her several more times. Without turning around, Erica said that from now on all this data is code blue. Everyone froze in surprise as they listened to Erica continuously repeat code blue. Clarice was most amazed by what was happening. She asked how it was possible that Erica had the ability to speak. Suddenly, Erica said her mission was accomplished. When the woman heard the name the girl had just called, Katerina received information from Erica about Clarice's discovery. The girl did not doubt her genius abilities. She stood up from the table, putting her glasses aside. She said that if they catch a zombie capable of maintaining their sanity, they will be able to achieve unprecedented heights. After that, she and Greg headed for the exit, saying that their vacation was over. Entering the control room, Katerina ordered everyone to prepare for takeoff. Taking her place, she told Kevin that they would be using the same weapon and asked him to hurry up and prepare it. But the man asked confusedly why she was going to use it. She had no intention of explaining to him and told him to simply carry out her order. Kevin said that in order to use these weapons, they need the approval of the president, so he will immediately seek his approval. Smiling, Katerina replied that her order was enough. She would simply provide a detailed report at the end. The man had no choice but to follow her orders. After this, he informed everyone that they would be using Mars and gave orders to begin preparing it immediately. The ship was approaching Clarice's house at high speed. Jane sensed danger approaching. She stood up abruptly, telling everyone that enemies were approaching them. The woman was surprised that their location was discovered so quickly. Jane told everyone to stay here while she fought and ran towards the exit. Clarice tried to stop her, shouting that it was too dangerous for her to approach the military. But she was seized by another coughing fit. Erica sat down next to her, offering her a glass of water. The woman asked the reason for her action. She just looked down sadly. At this time, Jane had already run out into the street. Looking up, she stopped. Jane noticed an approaching ship. After checking all the data, she discovered an unusual structure on it and established that it was a new type of military weapon, about which there was no information. The robot girl activated her body's power-up. She was determined to stop the enemy no matter what. The next moment, Jane jumped into the air towards the ship. In a few leaps, she was right in front of him. The weapon was already fully loaded and aimed at her. A moment later, a shot was fired. Jane realized that Clarice's research was the hope for all humanity, so she was obliged to protect her. Putting her hands in front of her, she created a protective barrier. The moment Jane appeared in their field of vision, the image from the cameras was transferred to the screen. Katerina's expectations were confirmed. It was obvious that the safety of the owner was paramount for this robot. Then she ordered Mars to be activated. Jane managed to create a large energy barrier. Katerina wondered if this robot could survive an attack from Mars. While in the laboratory, Sam, Erica, and Clarice heard loud noises outside. When the energy charge approached Jane, she covered herself with a barrier, not allowing it to pass further. With every second, more and more damage appeared on her body. She made a mistake in her calculations and realized too late that she was not able to contain such a large amount of energy. A few seconds later, there was a powerful explosion. At that moment, Clarice walked outside with Erica and Sam. She didn't understand what kind of light it was. When the bright flash from the explosion faded, the unconscious Jane flew down. Her body fell a few meters from the house. She did not respond to their screams, and small currents passed through her hands. Frightened, Sam and Clarice rushed to her. On the screen, you could see the boy lowered himself near the body of his robot. Kevin couldn't understand how an ordinary robot managed to stop a bomb that could destroy an entire mountain belt. Getting up from her seat, Katerina said that all robots are designed the same way as super soldiers. The girl suggested that today they could get more useful information. Turning to Kevin, she said that the most important skill of a commander is accuracy in assessing enemy capabilities. Then she ordered the hatch to be opened because they were going down. At the same time, Clarice and Sam sat next to Jane's motionless body, hoping to get at least some reaction from her to their voices. Suddenly, a huge shadow loomed over them. Clarice looked up to see what it was. The enemy ship stopped directly above their small group. Suddenly, the mechanism activated. A few moments later, a cabin containing military personnel descended. Clarice froze in surprise when she saw a familiar face there. As she descended, Katerina did not take her eyes off the woman. As soon as the cabin reached the ground, the doors opened, letting the girl, accompanied by military robots, out. Stopping in front of Clarice, she smiled. Erica helped her up. Katerina spoke first, saying she was glad to meet her old friend again. She noticed that her appearance had changed a lot over the past year. Without hiding her malice, Katerina said that this image suits Clarice much better. The girl looked at her in surprise when Clarice asked why she was still following her. Katerina replied that being the commander-in-chief is not easy. Even if Clarice committed a criminal offense, she cannot just arrest her. She reported that every day she receives reports about every step of the woman standing in front of her. After listing some of Clarice's most significant moments during this time, Katerina paused before continuing. She even knew the reason why the research laboratory was destroyed. When the government learned of the confidential information that this laboratory had obtained regarding the virus, it had to be destroyed. From the day Clarice received her scar in that dilapidated building, she was always on Katerina's gun. The woman understood what she meant. Freeing her hand from Erica's fingers, she asked why she betrayed her. Erica responded that the word treason doesn't really apply to this situation because she is property that belonged to the government from the very beginning. Clarice's eyes widened in surprise when Erica said that she was given 2 orders as a government robot, the first of which was to act as if her speech system was damaged in order to avoid leaking information. And the second order was that she needed to deliver an infected person who could control his mind at least partially. Clarice couldn't believe that this really happened. Having finished her story, Erica headed towards Katerina. The coughing fit again overtook the woman. Hearing this, Erica turned around looking at her regretfully. But she did not dare to approach and turned away. Wiping the blood with her hand, Clarice said that she should have known that she would not have been released so easily that day. Katerina just smiled slightly. Raising her head, Clarice assumed that the first phase of the project would soon be completed. She knew that the Venus project was aimed at destroying the virus. The woman remembered very well the day when she first heard about Venus. In 1976, a meeting was held at the general headquarters. Some have put forward the idea of immediately exterminating all infected people. But Clarice opposed it, saying that it was too much even for the government. She suggested that they try to find another way to get rid of the virus by isolating those infected for a while. Clarice tried to convey to them that the victims were still people. But the Secretary General dismissed her words, saying that she was talking nonsense. He recalled that everything had already been decided by the previously held national vote, and there was no point in discussing it again. 93% of the public supported their policy. The man blamed Clarice for the fact that such a situation resulted from her incompetence. On her orders, the medical community did not warn anyone about the impending disease. She interrupted him, correcting the vote he had previously stated, which was 76 to 24%. Clarice said that this was the result of a private poll conducted by the World Medical Society before the popular vote. She said the results are similar, but the difference in scale is too great. Looking at Tom, Clarice asserted rather than asked that the voting results were rigged. After her words, the man jumped up from his seat. He asked what evidence she had so that she could talk such nonsense with such confidence. Clarice ignored him and again addressed the council members with the words that there was no point in exterminating the infected. She argued that recently the virus has been spreading throughout the continent and infecting people, which means that somewhere there is another source of infection, in addition to the main infection from infected people. Katerina, along with everyone else, listened to the assumption of the president of the medical society that this source could not be discovered so easily, and no matter how many infected they killed. At this rate, they would not be able to stop the virus. Clarice also said that they are currently developing a new treatment called genetic factor treatment. She assured everyone that she would be able to show significant results within the next 6 months. But Tom interrupted her, saying that Clarice had been raving about her impossible project for a long time. The man opposed it, saying that they could not let the situation in the world take its course for 6 months. The owner of the Dom OZ company, which develops robots, suddenly intervened. He said that his company had long ago begun to develop a plan for quarantining the infected using robots, providing them with all the necessary means. If they were allowed to act immediately, they could quarantine 80% of those infected in just 2 months. Clarice thanked him for his detailed explanation. She then continued by saying that the current epidemic is the worst in the history of mankind, and if the government takes control and publishes a plan, they can regain the trust of the people. She suggested immediately requesting a settlement fund from the president. Andrew intervened again, saying that this idea would not succeed. He explained that the settlement fund had already been requested, but the president immediately rejected it. Clarice was shocked to hear this. She asked why the president rejected this plan. Andrew stood up from his seat and left the table. Walking around the table, he began a story from afar, saying that in Germany there was an old province ruled by a tyrant, and the fanatics of this province were fired up with the idea of founding their own country. They planned to call this country the Third Empire, While it was being created, their military expenses increased, and soon after that, the World War began. Passing by Clarice, the man said that that tyrant had one absurd dream in which the whole world was at his feet. After a pause, Andrew continued, saying that that tyrant had achieved his dream. At that time, the Third Empire had overwhelming military power. A tyrant could turn the entire world into countries under his control, or into ruins in just 2 years. Frowning his brows, Andrew said that their success was short-lived, and 4 years later the whole world was united and the tyrant was executed. Thus, the Third Empire collapsed. Spreading his arms to the sides, the man summed up that a world government union was created to rule the whole world. Clarice asked in bewilderment why he decided to talk about this now. He stood there for a few seconds thinking about something. Then Andrew turned around, saying that the created union still could not cope with the consequences of unreasonable world integration. The integration of the new currency led to the current state of inflation. Mass uprisings also began to occur around the world. Andrew did not forget to touch upon the environmental problems that arise due to rapid population growth. Even the problems of mass unemployment were caused by the technological revolution associated with the advent of robots. That is why Andrew believed that the government was on the verge of destruction, and in the current situation, it could not cure the infected and take any measures. His speech was interrupted by Clarice, asking whether it makes sense to destroy the infected simply because subsequent actions will fail. Turning to her, he replied that the point was, having abandoned the third class, put the second in order and change the situation for the better for the first class. Then he snapped his fingers. At the same moment, virtual monitors appeared in front of everyone. Everyone began to peer carefully at the image. Andrew said it was a plan written by the president himself. Clarice looked in bewilderment at the document, which contained a solution that could change the whole world in an instant. The Venus Project was introduced to everyone in this room. Andrew asked everyone to read the project summary on the first 3 pages. He said that there are also plans there that must be carried out by individuals. As Andrew advised, everyone read the indicated pages. Reaching the main plan, Katerina grinned, calling it madness. Clarice read line by line with horror. A few minutes later, the man again attracted attention. Clapping his hands, he said that he wanted to raise the most important issue of the day. To be more precise, today they had to discuss the first phase of the Venus Project. Clarice couldn't believe her ears when she heard that the goal of this phase was to reduce the world population to a minimum. She interrupted him, saying that they were all crazy. Clarice tried to convince the man that this was all nothing more than a simple massacre. She suddenly fell silent, noticing the actions of the others. Everyone in that room rose from their seats and cheered loudly in support of this plan. One of the women said that with the help of this wonderful plan, the whole world can be reset. She then pointed to the monitor, saying that what she liked the most was the part about confiscating the residents' property and using the resulting resources. She recalled that 4 years ago they abolished all ATMs and replaced them with cryptocurrency. Due to the fact that all the property of the population is recorded in the World Bank, they can easily confiscate everything. The man sitting across from Clarice said that if they confiscated and redistributed the confiscated money, they would be able to deal with the problems of inflation and bridge the gap between social statuses. Others also supported the plan, saying that in the future, they could expand the capabilities of robots and offload much of the routine work that people did to them. One of the men said that now, during the robotic industrial revolution, overpopulation is tantamount to poison. Another man said that since no one had any objections, all they had to do was establish an acceptable number of victims. Clarice stood there, unable to believe that these people were actually discussing such an inhumane plan. Everyone began to actively propose their own options for how many people and what percentage of genders they should keep. Katerina suddenly intervened, saying that she had previously asked the president a question about what percentage of the population they could kill in 1 year if they fully mobilized the army. Although she was joking at the time, after simulating the situation, Katerina came to the conclusion that they could destroy approximately 86% of the population. After thinking about her words, Tom guessed that the result should only be 1 billion, which was quite good. The rest also supported the value of 1 billion, after which Andrew said that although they had reached an agreement, they should not break the formalities and proposed a vote. Clarice couldn't bear to listen to this anymore and slammed her fist on the table, drawing attention to herself. She asked if they had forgotten exactly how the Third Empire was destroyed. Clarice recalled the crazy idea of integration of races carried out by the tyrant. That massacre was not even recorded in the history books. The blood of more than 120 million ordinary people was shed, resulting in a riot. She asked if they really wanted to do something like this again. The woman, with tears in her eyes, asked whether it was worth rejecting the Third Empire then, if now they were going to carry out a massacre 10 times worse than that one. Andrew ignored her, saying that voting was ongoing. He asked everyone who agreed that the population should be reduced to 1 billion to raise their hand. Everyone raised their hands unanimously, with the exception of Clarice. After examining everyone, the man said that the decision had been made, and after the completion of the first phase of Venus, the number of survivors should be 1 billion. Clarice was unable to influence anything that day. Afterwards, she told the press about this plan, but not a single mention of Venus appeared, and scientists who shared her view were brutally killed by the military. That day, the research institute was strewn with many corpses of budding scientists. Only Erica and her owner Clarice managed to survive, although she was in serious condition. Clarice assumed that it was during this period that Erica deceived her. Katerina said that saving the life of the former president of the medical community was a kind of insurance. At the moment, doctors are on the side of the government. They also want to find a cure, but they have too little chance of success. The girl admitted that Clarice is the most outstanding person among those researchers who cannot find a single clue, let alone develop a cure. When she realized that the woman was also infected, she herself was ready to give up. But luck was on her side. She said that a zombie suddenly appeared and retained its sanity. Clarice asked how far the first phase of the Venus project would go. Although this was secret information, Katerina was ready to share it with her as a reward for finding a cure. She said the current rate is 84% of the population. To date, 52% have already been destroyed. Katerina was sure that if everything went smoothly, then only 16% would remain uninfected. She confidently stated that they could achieve this result in less than 5 months. Afterwards, the girl said that the second phase will come after the medicine is provided to the whole world. It was difficult for Clarice to learn the details of the current situation in the world. A couple of seconds later, she pulled out the plate hidden in her pocket. Showing it to Katerina, the woman said that no matter her efforts, such a terrible plan would not be carried out. She explained that in her hands, there is a hard drive that stores all the data about the medicine. It exists only in a single copy. The next moment, Clarice broke it into 2 halves. Katerina was overcome with horror as she realized exactly what the woman sitting in front of her had just done. She screamed that she had gone crazy, and with such an action had doomed many lives to the mercy of fate. Clarice replied that because of her actions, they would have no choice but to stop the murders. The woman was sure that even if it wasn't her, someone in this huge world would definitely create a cure. Katerina listened to her, barely containing her emotions. Clarice understood that she had very little time left and decided to give one last piece of advice to Katerina, saying that humanity cannot be judged for its numbers. The girl just frowned, not hiding her irritation. Then she turned around, saying that she no longer needed Clarice. Returning to the cabin, Katerina gave the order to the military robots to get rid of this woman. Hearing her words, Sam raised his head and looked at her in surprise. He tried to say something to stop Katerina. Realizing that he would achieve nothing in this way, the hero tried to shout to Jane. But she did not react to his voice in any way, and then Sam began to disturb her body. At the same time, Jane's automatic recovery mode boot was activated. The energy core has already been restored by 30%. The robots are already approaching Clarice. She just closed her eyes, resigning herself to such an end. The next moment, the woman heard a weapon being pointed at her. But when nothing happened for several seconds, she opened her eyes and looked ahead in surprise. The robot said that he could not attack her because it would be a violation of the law. Hearing this, Katerina began to laugh quietly. However, the very next moment she was laughing out loud without holding back. Turning around, the girl said that a few moments ago, Clarice was very cute with that expression on her face. Then she said that everything was exactly as she had imagined. Nodding towards Erica, Katerina said that although she did not receive the drug data directly, it did not mean that she lost. The girl said that all this time Clarice had an excellent robot with her. After her words, Erica disconnected the part from her device, with which she communicated with Jane the last time, and gave it to Katerina, who said that copying the data at this time is even easier than taking candy from a child. Clarice was startled by this and shouted at Erica not to do this because this information should not fall into the hands of the government. At the same moment, a sharp flash of pain pierced her. The next attack meant that the effect of the previously injected medicine had ended, and the disease began to spread further with accelerated force. The woman curled up on the ground with pain coursing through her entire body. Looking at this picture, Katerina assumed that the virus was gradually beginning to take over her mind. Smiling, the girl said that very soon Clarice would evolve into a monster. But since she had taken a significant step towards creating a vaccine, the woman should have no regrets. Excited, Erica rushed towards Clarice. Sitting down next to her, she asked her how she was feeling. Turning around, Erica asked Katerina to fulfill her promise and keep her word. She recalled that the girl promised her that if the mission was successfully completed, she would save Clarice's life. Shielding the owner, Erica said that she would soon become a zombie, and then she would no longer be able to tell anyone any secrets. Erica begged Katerina to keep her promise. Looking at this scene, the girl remembered the past. A year ago, this robot also begged to save Clarice. Snapping her fingers, she replied that she never forgets her promises. After a pause, Katerina said that unlike robots, people know how to lie. Erica looked in surprise at the girl standing in front of her. The next moment, many shots pierced her body. When the military robot stopped firing, Erica collapsed to the ground. Clarice, lying on the ground, watched this in horror. Shouting out her name, the woman tried with all her might to crawl towards Erica. Frowning her brows, Katerina said that she was the first to be insulted in this way. Never before had an ordinary robot tried to make a deal with her. But that wasn't the only reason she was angry. Katerina was well aware that Erica had tried to ruin her plan when she tried to get rid of Sam. The girl said that she could not forgive her for this mistake. Anxious, Clarice tried to call Erica. She turned her head and apologized to the woman. She admitted that even when she realized that Katerina's promise was a lie, Erica continued to interfere with Clarice's research. Erica said that she changed the original data when she conducted virtual experiments, and also tried to kill Sam. But clinging to the 100th chance that Katerina would still fulfill her promise, she gave her the data. Because Erica prioritized saving her master's life over the lives of all humanity, she declared that she was no longer worthy of being called a Medroid. A single tear rolled down Clarice's cheek. Almost silently, she said with just her lips that Erica was not to blame. Closing her eyes, she said that she never blamed her for what happened. When the woman opened her eyes again a couple of seconds later, her eye sockets were completely black, which meant that the virus had gotten the better of her. A military robot standing nearby analyzed Clarice's condition. Having determined that she was no longer human, the robots turned their weapons on her. Due to the fact that she has lost her human essence, they now do not break the law and can carry out the previously given order. One of the military robots turned around as a sudden noise behind them caught his attention. A moment later, Jane punched his head. As a result, he flew several meters back. Katerina watched, not understanding what was happening here. Jane said that the automatic recovery was 48% complete. A couple of seconds later, the percentage of recovery increased and previously damaged areas of the body were strengthened. She was determined to return Clarice's research data. Katerina understood how this was possible, because the shot from Mars definitely hit her. Kevin wondered a similar question about how the damaged robot was still able to move. He turned to one of his subordinates, who scanned Jane and reported that she had completely stopped functioning, asking what was going on here, but he could not give a reasonable answer. Looking at the screen, Greg remembered the time when he himself fought with this robot. After the fatal attack was dealt to her, he deemed Jane no longer competent. But suddenly she recovered and became stronger. Greg said that this home robot is fraught with many secrets. Kevin ordered military robots to be sent as reinforcements. Meanwhile, Jane was already running towards the military robot. Approaching him, she kicked his torso, punching right through him. Then she grabbed his head. A moment later, Jane pinned the robot to the ground. At the same time, dozens of military robots were released from the ship. Noticing this, Jane raised her head up, watching what was happening. A few seconds later, the robots landed with a terrible noise. Dozens of robots appeared opposite Jane. After conducting self-diagnosis, she found out that the integrity of her body was only 40%. Her goal was to get closer to Commander Katerina and return data on a medicine that could cure the virus, and then escape from the current situation. She intended to destroy obstacles in the form of military robots that appeared. A moment later, the robots took up their weapons and began shooting at her. But Jane deftly dodged the bullets, moving at high speed. Approaching one of the robots, she cut his torso in half. Jane knocked the other one away with a kick to the stomach. Clarice and Sam watched in surprise. The guy did his best to support Jane. The woman managed to retain the remnants of her mind, and she was aware of the current situation. Jane desperately fought against the military robots, trying to make her way to Katerina. Kevin, who watched this, experienced great tension. He realized that ordinary military robots were not enough to deal with Jane. He asked a subordinate if they could carry out an attack from the air, but was told that this was not possible at the moment. Greg had been carefully watching Jane's movements all this time and analyzing the situation. At one point, he shared his observations, saying that she was weaker than before. Jane herself at that moment was trying to fight off the robots that surrounded her from all sides. Greg explained that her movements were not as fast as last time, and he assumed that she had not yet fully recovered from Mars's shot. Suddenly, one of the military robots grabbed her arm. The next moment, Jane lost this limb. She frowned, realizing that losing her arm at such a moment could make the situation critical. Despite this, Jane continued to attack her opponents with her remaining hand. The war robots raised their weapons again and pointed them at her. This time, she was unable to escape the fire. The system warned Jane that the energy core had been damaged. With every second, the integrity of her body was rapidly decreasing. A moment later, the vision sensor was also damaged and the self-healing process was forcibly stopped. With difficulty, Jane managed to catch the sound of approaching footsteps. Before she passed out, she saw the silhouette of Katerina stopping opposite. The girl was pleased with what she saw in front of her. It amazed her that she had fought so hard to match a human. Slowly raising her hand, Jane said that her target was approaching. She reached out to Katerina standing next to her, repeating that she was obliged to return the data. But Jane fell before she could reach her goal. Katerina looked at her indifferently. A moment later, she admitted that Jane managed to surprise her because she has the ability to self-heal, which is built only into super soldiers. She then turned around and ordered the military robots to take Jane with them. The girl planned to provide it to Andrew from the House of OZ for analysis. She was wondering who was the creator of this model. Sam jumped out of his seat and ran to Jane. He approached her within seconds and intended to attack her from behind. But Katerina turned in his direction, sensing a threat. She managed to dodge Sam's attack and his fist flew into the ground. She was surprised that he decided to attack her. The boy, who retained his mind after infection, interested the girl no less than his robot. The next moment, she gave a signal to the military robots. Katerina said that it would be better if she captured it herself. Taking out her sword, she said that to complete this task, she did not need to leave Sam's arms and legs intact. At that moment, he rushed at her. She pointed the blade of the sword at him. But a couple of moments later, the boy froze in surprise, never having reached Katerina. Clarice managed at the last moment. Standing in front of Sam, she took the blow upon herself. Katerina did not have time to stop, and the blade went through the woman who suddenly appeared. She clenched her teeth from the pain coming from the wound. A moment later, she screamed that the pain experienced by the patient was equivalent to death. The girl was amazed that Clarice managed to retain the ability to speak. Suddenly, the woman approached Katerina, saying that she should feel this pain properly. The next moment, she bit her on the cheek, tearing off a piece of skin. Due to the fact that the girl recoiled sharply, her cap fell to the ground. When Clarice looked at Katerina's face again, her eyes widened in surprise. She asked what caused such a reaction in the woman. She asked if the zombies didn't like the artificial flesh of the mechanical doll. Looking at Clarice's surprised face, Katerina said that it was a doll that could synchronize with brainwaves, designed to protect important people. She explained that artificial intelligence does not have a conscience. The doll only reads the brainwaves of its owner and is controlled by them. Katerina's position was too high to go out and fight the polluted creatures herself. Suddenly, Clarice's consciousness left her. The exhausted woman fell to the ground. At the same moment, the doll transmitted the received data to the real Katerina. After that, she sheathed the sword and, looking to the side, noticed a wary guy. Picking up her cap from the ground, the girl looked at Sam and asked why he didn't attack. Smiling, she said that he knew what futile attempts were. Then she turned around and headed back to the cabin, said that their mission was over, and commanded the military robots to grab Sam and Jane. Following her orders, one of them grabbed the guy who was desperately trying to escape. Another grabbed the unconscious Jane. The remaining robot aimed its weapon at Clarice, who was lying in a pool of her own blood, with the goal of completely destroying her. Erica, who was conscious, tried to shout to her mistress. Sam saw this too and broke free from the robot's hands to come to the aid of his friends. Suddenly, Jane opened her eyes again, but the system notified her that movement was not possible at the moment. Her hull was only 2% intact, with 28 hours and 30 minutes remaining until complete recovery. A moment later, the emergency program was launched, and based on the results of scanning the surrounding area, a humanoid robot was detected at a distance of 25 meters. After analyzing Erica's condition, the system reported that all requirements had been met and preparations for the transfer had begun. A couple of moments later, the system was forced to boot. The operating system installation was successfully loaded. After this, Erica's body began to recover quickly. She opened her eyes for a few seconds. Suddenly, the robot targeting Clarice was destroyed in an instant. Hearing the shots, Katerina turned around to see what was happening. Clarice had regained consciousness by this time and watched what was happening in amazement. The system reported a successful system update and the medical module was disabled. Now Erica's combat skills prevailed, with the help of which she got rid of the robot a moment ago. Kevin looked at the screen in bewilderment, not understanding what happened this time. He was sure that this medical robot was disabled, but suddenly all its damaged parts were restored. Katerina felt the same bewilderment at what was happening. Erica applied the cloth to clean Clarice's wounds. She said she was able to stop the bleeding. Although the words were difficult for Clarice, she said that today she had already managed to see a miracle several times, looking at Erica's restored body. She just looked sadly at her mistress, assessing her condition. Clarice suffered fatal internal injuries. Erica did not want to admit that the chance of survival was practically equal to 1. Extending her hand to her, Clarice said that she should leave here as soon as possible. At least she should survive. She put her owner's hand back, saying that she should rest a little. Erica promised that she would take care of everything. After examining the weapon in her hands, Katarina realized that the weapon in Erica's hands was a combat module. The girl had a bad feeling. She commanded the military robot to deal with Erica, but she was already running towards them, preparing for an attack. When she came within their range, the robots opened fire. Suddenly, she jumped up, moving out of the line of fire. Erica then attacked her opponents from the air. The military robots were destroyed in the same instant, falling under her attack. She also got rid of the robot holding Sam. Then she freed Jane by shooting the robot in the arm. Moments later, having destroyed more enemies, Erica landed. Raising her head, she looked around. Kevin didn't understand how an ordinary medical robot got such combat power. He could explain Jane's similar strength because she was a modified model, but this robot was from a mass-produced model, and it certainly couldn't be modified. The man could not find a single logical explanation for the sudden change from medical to combat class. Katarina guessed that Jane was somehow involved in this. Breaking through the military robots, Erica approached Katarina, pointing her weapon at her. She wanted to say something to the approaching robot, but did not have time. The next moment, Erica shot the doll in the head. From such a sharp break in communication with the doll, Katarina felt a little discomfort. Kevin ordered everyone to proceed to launch an aerial bombardment. The data on the cure was already in their hands, and they no longer needed to be careful. A girl who stopped next to him said that this was not enough, because that medical robot was on the same level as Jane, or even stronger than her. She also noted that Erica specializes in long-range attacks, and it is not known whether they will be shot down if they attack indiscriminately. Katarina ordered their ship to be raised higher. Her order was carried out immediately, and their ship began to rapidly gain altitude. Erica watched this, standing next to the motionless body of the commander doll. Katarina said that all her pride was destroyed along with the doll's head. Sometime later, she was informed that the altitude had been reached and recharging of Mars had begun. The installed capacity was 76%. But the girl replied that they no longer needed to regulate the power as before and said to increase the amount of energy generated to the maximum. According to her order, preparation of Mars began. Erica stood in the same place, scanning the distant ship. She noticed the accumulation of an abnormal amount of energy on him. After making calculations, Erica understood that she would not be able to repel the attack in normal mode, so an alternative one was launched. The subordinates informed their captain that the recharging of Mars was completed. When it was announced that there were 10 seconds left until it was activated, Kevin noticed something strange. The screen clearly showed how the medical robot's hand began to glow. At some point, the glowing limb disintegrated into small parts. When the girl said that the restructuring of the body was completed, a weapon appeared in place of the hand. Everyone watched the transformation that took place in bewilderment. One of the subordinates analyzed the changes and reported that her arm had been redesigned into a cannon. Greg and Kevin froze in surprise when they heard the suggestion that Erica was preparing to shoot her. But Katarina replied that it didn't matter because even a super soldier would never be able to withstand Mars at full power. There was only 1% left until it was fully charged. A moment later, Mars fired. Erica froze, waiting for the right moment. The energy charge was approaching the medical robot at high speed. Once at a sufficient distance, she activated the cannon. Everyone on the warship closely watched what was happening on the screen, waiting for the explosion to occur. But even 10 seconds after the shot, nothing happened. Erica began to absorb the energy from the shot with her cannon. Carl noticed that something was wrong with this situation. Katarina froze in surprise when she heard that the amount of energy generated by Mars was gradually decreasing. After carefully analyzing the data, Carl reported that Erica absorbs this energy, and this gun is not needed for shooting at all. It turned out to be a reflective-type weapon. Meanwhile, Erica was absorbing more and more energy. Realizing the current situation, Katarina said that they must immediately leave the ship using escape capsules. For a few moments, all the energy from the shot was absorbed by Erica. After that, she activated the mirror image and aimed the cannon at the enemy ship. An energy beam passed through him. A moment later, a powerful explosion was heard in the sky, destroying the ship. Burning debris flew down. Katarina's squad managed to successfully leave the ship. Kevin, sitting next to her, said that only thanks to her quick decision to evacuate, they were able to leave the affected area without any losses. It was noticeable that the girl was very nervous. She asked what happened to the data received from Clarice. Kevin hesitated, and after a long pause replied that they were stored on the server of the destroyed ship. Out of frustration, she bit her lip until it bled, realizing that they had lost very valuable data. Katerina took out her anger on the chair, hitting the armrest. Then she said that they should go to the headquarters of the House of Oz Company, but the surprised Kevin asked if they should first return to their headquarters to report on the current situation. Katerina replied that they would still visit the House of Oz first. She had to find out what was wrong with these robots. If they left things as they were, the situation could get out of control. The girl was sure that if Andrew took up this matter, he would definitely find the answer to what exactly these robots were. She was especially interested in the engineer who created Jane. Once the enemy ship was destroyed, Erica deactivated the cannon and returned her kuka to its original state. After that, she ran to Clarice. Approaching her, she took the woman in her arms, saying that she would definitely cure her. But she extended her hand to her, saying that everything was fine with her. Clarice said that Erica should have figured it out by now. Because of the wound she received, even with the regeneration provided by the virus, she still would not survive. Erica tried to argue with her, but she was interrupted. Clarice asked to be put back on the ground. When there was no response to her request, she said that she wanted to tell Erica her story. She had no choice but to fulfill her mistress's last wish. After 26 hours, Jane had recovered and opened her eyes. Looking at the ceiling, she realized that she was in Clarice's house. Remembering the circumstances under which she passed out, she began to worry about Sam. She didn't even have time to get out of bed when a joyful guy hovered over her. He immediately rushed to hug Jane, who had woken up. Patting him on the head, she said that she was fine. Sometime later, they left the house together. Once outside, Jane froze in surprise. She saw the restored Erica with a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. Turning around, the surprised Erica asked if Jane had recovered. She replied that she had only recovered by half, but that was enough to function normally. Suddenly, she noticed something that made her gaze filled with sadness. A wooden cross was installed a couple of meters from her, marking Clarice's burial place. They all approached him together, after which Erica knelt down and placed the collected flowers on the grave. Jane apologized to her, saying that if they had not come here, this would not have happened, but Erica interrupted her, jumping that there was no need for an apology. She explained that even if they had not come here, nothing would have changed. But on the other hand, only thanks to them, Clarice managed to make the discovery that she had been working on for so long. Erica smiled, remembering how happy her owner had been in recent days. After a long pause, she said that for Clarice, their visit was akin to a blessing. Jane looked at Erica sadly. Then she asked what she was going to do next. Having answered, Erica recalled the contents of the 7th article of the law concerning the death of the owner. Jane remembered the day that marked the end of their previous life. Many robots ceased functioning after the death of their master. She was sad to realize that Erica would also have to cease to exist herself. Erica fell silent, remembering Clarice's last moments. Her mistress asked if she remembered the words Jane said on the first day. She believed that the best thing she could do was not to give up, but to hope and move forward. Clarice asked Erica to remember one important thing. Taking her hand, the woman said that the thing called hope can only be created with your own hands. As her final wish, Clarice asked that Erica, along with Sam and Jane, create their own hope together. Emerging from her memories, she said that this clause of the law can be neglected if the owner left his last wish. Rising from her knees, Erica continued, saying that in this case, the robot must continue to live in order to fulfill this wish. Turning around, she said that her memory disk contained the medicine data Clarice left behind. Hearing this, Jane and Sam looked at her in surprise. Smiling, Erica asked to accompany her for a while. Jane happily accepted her offer and smiled happily. Afterwards, she took her hand and suggested that everyone travel together. That night, Katerina finally reached the main office of the House of OZ. She showed footage of fights with Jane and Erica. A man sitting opposite the screen carefully watched every action of these robots. A few minutes later, he gave his verdict, saying it looked like some kind of computer virus. After pressing the remote control, Andrew turned off the TV. Katerina looked at him in surprise and asked what this meant. He replied that in order to finally be convinced of this, he must analyze these robots more carefully. Andrew suggested that a modified version of the operating system installed in the home robot took control of the medical robot system, rewriting it like its own. He said that until the situation stabilizes, there is no way to restore their operating systems, and there is also a chance that Jane had a hidden fragment embedded in her code that would run under certain circumstances. Katerina stopped him, asking what he meant. She thought that no matter how much the operating system is modified, in the end it is just a normal software problem. When the girl asked if this kind of transformation was possible due to a simple change in the system, Andrew replied that it was possible. Katerina froze in surprise. Trying to understand the situation, she asked how this was possible, exhaling heavily. The man replied that since she held the position of commander-in-chief, she should know about it. But before he began his explanations, he said that Katerina had no right to divulge to anyone what she would hear in the future. Looking at her seriously, the man explained that this information was personally marked by the president as top secret. Then he began the story, saying that all robots from domestic and medical to super soldiers are humanoid and have identical technical characteristics. Katerina was surprised to hear something like that. She objected, saying that couldn't be true. The man said that when they advertised their products, their main slogan was that there was no need for charging. It was announced that robots could work for a whole day, completely dependent only on solar energy. Andrew admitted that the reality was completely different. A conventional solar panel would not be able to produce energy so efficiently. Katerina realized that it was not the mentioned batteries that were used for this purpose, but something that was on a completely different level. He said that the true nature of the robot's energy core is something that can produce and sustain energy indefinitely. To be more precise, it is based on an infinite energy source. Katerina was amazed by such a discovery and said that such a thing could not exist even theoretically. Andrew nodded, saying that this completely ignored the first law of thermodynamics. Continuing his story, the man noted that such an energy source can produce a terrifying amount of energy that cannot even be estimated, so they control its power for each robot using the installed operating system. Faced with a blank look from his interlocutor, he explained that the restrictions placed on the kernel could be lifted by changes in the operating system. That is why there is a possibility of transformations like those that happened to Jane and Erica. This all seemed absurd to Katharina, and she asked why they had not yet announced a discovery of this magnitude. Without waiting for an answer, the girl asked the next question regarding their motives and the reason why this type of energy generator is only used in robots. The man replied that before using the House of OZ, he conducted a test in an environment similar to a human one. At least he assumed that was the case. Katerina didn't understand what he meant. When she asked if he was the owner of this company, Andrew replied that he owned it only in words. Closing his eyes, he said that this was also classified information. He admitted that in reality the House of OZ is a state enterprise. His role was only to manage the company and some other things related to the software, and the government is responsible for the production of robots. The man explained this by saying that for the residents who are tired of the dictatorship of the Third Empire, they are masquerading as a private enterprise because people would not perceive the true state of affairs positively. Therefore, even he does not know exactly when an infinite source of energy was invented, and he also does not know about the method of its creation. Today, the place where most robots are created is Sector Number 1. The largest plant for their production is located there. This is due to one serious problem. Andrew said that an endless source of energy is produced in only one place on the planet. But due to the fact that this sector is directly connected with the president and is controlled by counterintelligence, even him is prohibited from entering there. Katerina was surprised by such a statement. He suggested that the reason for the need for such serious protection is to prevent critical situations. Looking at his interlocutor, the man said that the current situation was exactly like this. Katerina frowned at his words. Andrew continued, saying that if they leave those robots alone now, then in the future they may rebel against humanity, and they do not know whether they will form a squad in which each of them will be equal in strength to a super soldier. Having thought about the current situation, the girl tried to guess what consequences await them from the fact that an infected person is the owner of such a dangerous power. Rising from her seat, she thanked the man for providing her with the information. As she walked toward the exit, she suddenly turned around because she remembered another unasked question. Katerina asked if Andrew knew who the person who developed the operating system for Jane was. The man just looked at her with a hard look. After saying goodbye to him, she returned to the ship, where Kevin was waiting for her. She was in thought the whole way back. Kevin could only guess what kind of conversation she had with the head of the House of OZ company. Suddenly, the girl came out of her thoughts and asked him to contact headquarters so that they could prepare the main ship for departure. She said that as soon as they got there, they would go straight to the president's palace. Kevin asked if Katerina was sure that it was worth doing this. She looked at him blankly. Adjusting his glasses, the man recalled that they had recently lost one of the best warships and had also shot from Mars twice without permission. He asked if she was really sure that they should go to the president now, knowing that in a fit of rage he might even beat them. She said that she would deal with this on her own later and again plunged into her thoughts. If it weren't for the seriousness of the situation, she would really prefer not to meet with the president now, but she needs to get permission to use super soldiers. Meanwhile, Andrew replayed the video that Katerina had given him during their recent meeting. He was most interested in Jane. He couldn't believe that the man he had admired for many years had spent his retirement in an abandoned sector. The man took out a medallion that he always carried with him. Andrew didn't take his piercing eyes off the screen. He was sure that Jane was the last fragment of the project that this man left behind. Closing his eyes, the man thanked this man for such a gift. Thanks to this, he will finally get rid of the feelings of inferiority and disappointment that have haunted him all these years. Andrew set himself the goal of surpassing Louise, who was his teacher, at any cost. At the same time, Erica took Sam and Jane to a car parked not far from the house. She said that the car belonged to Clarice, and all this time they had been driving it into the city, while Jane and her master looked at this vehicle with delight. Turning to Erica, Jane asked where they would go, because they already had all the necessary data and all they had to do was create a cure. After her words, the honey robot thought about it. Suddenly, Jane remembered that there was a medical facility in Sector M42 and asked Erica if it had survived. But she apologized, saying that she could not analyze this data. Erica explained that these were not restrictions placed on her, but laws set by humans for robots. Medical robots were designed in such a way that they could not do anything better than humans. She suggested that the reason for this was to prevent the loss of specialists, but in reality, everyone understood perfectly well that humanity was still not ready to entrust their lives to a robot. After listening to her, Jane helped Sam climb into the car. Taking a seat next to Erica, she outlined their first task: finding a doctor. Moving away, she replied that before her death, Clarice mentioned someone who could inherit the data. Erica said she saw Martin when he worked as Clarice's assistant for a while. Although this man was a terribly sloppy person who always sat buried in his old book, its owner recognized his abilities. When Jane asked if they would go looking for this man, Erica nodded, answering that it would not be an easy journey. She said that the place where the man works is at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention and is located in Sector EU0. Having analyzed the distance to the final destination, Jane noted that it was very far. Erica said that distance is not their biggest problem. Due to the fact that Sam is with them, they will have a lot more problems if they poke their nose into this sector. She explained that this area is a quarantine residential area. Therefore, this is one of the few zones where people live without feeling a threat to their lives. The three of them had been moving non-stop for some time. Jane broke the silence by turning to Erica. She invited her to become friends. Jane said that people who spend a lot of time together and have common goals become friends. Erica responded that she didn't fully understand the concept of friendship. After her words, Jane realized that she had raised a topic that was difficult for other robots to understand and apologized. But to her surprise, Erica replied that although she wasn't sure if they would make good friends, she didn't mind trying. Jane was incredibly happy that she had a new friend. She and Sam clapped their hands together happily. Suddenly, something on the road caught Erica's attention. Ahead, someone put his hand out to the side, hoping that a passing car would stop and the driver would kindly agree to give a ride to a fellow traveler. Joe was incredibly glad to meet someone in such a wilderness who could help her. She jumped and waved her arms from side to side, attracting attention. Taking a closer look, Jane asked if the girl standing in front was a robot. Erica nodded her head, answering that she was also a house robot. She scanned Joe and said it was the latest model, having been released last March. To the girl's surprise, the car drove past her. When Jane asked why they didn't stop, Erica replied that they had too long a journey ahead and they shouldn't help other robots. She also said that the robot seemed suspicious to her, if only because she did not obey the law, according to which robots must wear only prescribed clothing based on their field of activity. Looking back sadly, Jane said that they could at least know her story. Suddenly, something clung to their car from behind. Sam and Jane watched in surprise. Grabbing the other end of the cable, Joe sat on their tail, shouting that in this cruel world, robots should help each other. She shouted all sorts of hurtful things at Erica. When she was called a one-eyed, heartless creature, her patience came to an end. Erica began to throw the car from side to side, hoping that the tail in Joe's face would finally come unstuck. Sometime later, they stopped at a gas station, deciding to listen to Joe's story. Erica asked about who she was and what she did. The girl introduced herself, saying her name was Joe, but after today, they could call her Hitchhiker. After this, Erica continued her questioning, asking who her owner was and why she was walking around alone. Joe replied that she was looking for her owner everywhere and wanted to ask them for a ride to the industrial zone in Sector F6. Opening the card, Erica apologized and said that they would not be able to fulfill this request. She explained that the sector she needed was in the west, and they were heading east. For this reason, they would not be able to give Joe a ride. Having finished her explanation, Erica led Sam and Jane back to the car, no longer paying any attention to the girl who was left alone. Running up to them, Joe said that the sector they were heading to was under quarantine and asked the reason for such a risky decision, especially with an infected person in addition. But Erica replied that they were not obliged to explain their actions to her. Exhaling heavily, Joe said that they don't need to be so careful, because robots don't know how to lie anyway. Joe tried to find an explanation for Erica's cold attitude and suggested that she had once been betrayed, and that is why she was acting this way now. Unable to bear it any longer, she turned around, saying that the girl should be more careful with her words. But she only laughed, saying that she had hit the target, judging by such a reaction. Afterwards, Joe more seriously said that they really shouldn't go into the quarantine zone, because without proper preparation, they would be destroyed in a split second as soon as they step inside. Pointing at Sam, she said that he was 100% likely to die first. Frightened, Jane hugged her master, asking what this city was all about. Joe replied that she had passed by it about 17 days ago. She was not allowed to speak further when a military helicopter suddenly appeared. The pilot's goal was achieved, and the infected was discovered. He began to descend, preparing to attack his target. Jane and Erica turned around in horror and also saw a helicopter approaching them. Joe just grinned, saying that this was a great opportunity to show off her abilities. She then tossed her bag to Jane and said they could relax and watch the show. A moment later, everyone heard a warning about the opening of fire. Joe stopped in front of the helicopter, saying that she wouldn't need 10 minutes. After that, she activated her ability. The girl quickly clicked on the necessary system windows. Jane had a couple of seconds to prepare, after which she said that the synchronization was completed. Having penetrated the robot system, she managed to change the instructions. The indicator that marked Sam changed its color from red to green, indicating that the selected target did not pose any threat. Next, Joe gave the robot the order to self-destruct. A couple of seconds later, the military helicopter exploded from the inside. Friends standing nearby watched what was happening in surprise. The helicopter, engulfed in fire, quickly fell to the ground. After it hit the ground, there was a loud explosion. Joe approached the frozen Jane and Erica, asking how they were enjoying this little show. She said that they were very lucky to meet her, because without her help, they should not even dream of getting into the quarantine area. Closing her eyes, Joe decided she should introduce herself properly. The next moment, pointing to herself, she said that she was the only robot with a pre-installed hacker module. Her performance was interrupted by Erica, who hit Joe in the head with a medical hammer. She said that they were located next to a gas station, and her rash actions could have caused it to explode. Joe looked at Erica in surprise and said that the gas station would have exploded anyway. She pointed to the site of the explosion, explaining that the flames were large and the wind was blowing from the northeast at a speed of 3 meters per second. Taking this into account, in 1 minute and 24 seconds the fire will spread and another explosion will occur, the radius of which will be about 2 meters. When Joe said that if they didn't leave immediately, they would have a hard time, Erica could hardly contain her anger towards her. A few seconds later, everyone climbed into the car and Erica began to move as far away from this place as possible. At the same time, Katerina reached the presidential palace. She and Greg walked through the long corridors to the president's office. But the man could not hide his poor condition while following the commander. Turning around, Katerina asked what happened to him, since he looked so sick, but he replied that he was fine. Afterwards, he hesitantly asked if they were going to visit the president. The girl replied that this was so, and asked what worried him. Greg asked why he was chosen to attend such an important event, and not her chief secretary. She replied that Kevin was still busy writing reports for headquarters, so he didn't have time for anything else. Afterwards, Katerina asked why Greg suddenly had such questions, and suggested that he did not like being here. But the man replied that everything was completely wrong. Grinning, she advised him not to be so tense, because the president is the same person as they are. Suddenly, another person appeared on the way. The guy, being the chief security officer of the president, immediately recognized Katerina, and saluting her, greeted her in a befitting manner. Greg would be surprised to see a young boy here and assume that he is a new recruit. But after examining his uniform, he noticed 2 stars sewn on. After that, he followed Siegfried's example and also saluted him, which earned Katerina a displeased look. The next moment, she slapped him on the head. The girl asked if he knew the basics of relations between subordinates and superiors. Katerina said that as long as he was with her, he did not need to salute. Rubbing the bruise, Greg apologized, saying that he was very nervous. Afterwards, the girl approached Siegfried, who was blocking their path, and asked him to move away. He bowed low, apologizing for his rudeness. Stepping aside, the guy asked permission to examine Katerina, because by order of the president, carrying weapons inside was strictly prohibited. After his words, without further ado, she took off her weapon and threw it to Siegfried, who deftly caught her sword and pistol. She said that this was all she had with her and forbade her to even touch herself with a finger. The girl also expressed her assumption that he did not need to conduct a thorough check to make sure that she still had hidden weapons. The guy only nodded, confirming her thought. Greg then followed suit and gave Siegfried his weapon. While catching up with Katerina, he was thinking about why things were so bad between her and that guy. Suddenly, she said that if Greg suddenly met Siegfried alone, then he should not salute him. She said that their honor was at stake. Katerina explained that this guy is not a person, but a personal item of the president. Greg was surprised to hear that he was the only robot to be given the honor of becoming an officer. She said that Siegfried's true nature is the most destructive weapon, the strongest that has ever been created in the history of mankind. He was a super soldier. Turning around, Greg could not believe that he had a chance to see the most legendary robot, about which there were many rumors. Approaching the director's office, Katerina knocked on the massive door, announcing her arrival. The man inside the office gave permission to enter. Meanwhile, Jane's company with a new member was moving to Sector F6. Jane tried to find out as much information as possible about the quarantine zone, but Joe constantly evaded the answer. She justified this by saying that once they got the information they needed, Erica would immediately throw her out of the car. After Joe approached her, asking if her suspicions were true, Erica did not deny anything, saying that she was too suspicious. After analyzing her manner of communication and appearance, Erica suggested that Joe had been illegally re-signed. When Jane heard that according to the law, such reflashing of a robot is punishable by 30 years of imprisonment in prison, she felt uncomfortable because she too had been illegally reflashed. Erica also mentioned that the robots have the strongest security system built into them in the whole world, and to reflash them, you need to be a world-class programmer. Smiling, Joe asked what she was trying to say with such hints. Erica said she wouldn't beat around the bush and would ask directly. The next moment, she asked if Joe was a government robot sent to monitor them, but she just smiled, leaving this question unanswered. Jane intervened in their conversation, saying that Joe could not be a spy. She explained this by saying that from the very first meeting, she acted as if she had seen them for the first time, and pretending that this was not the case would be difficult for a robot, because they do not know how to lie. Erica suggested that these laws could be rewritten in her system. Jane countered by saying that since the robots were released, there had only been 67 instances where a robot had had the law rewritten in its memory, but due to their nature, there had not been a single instance where Article number 1, 2, or 3 had been rewritten. She explained this by saying that if one of these articles is ignored, robots can become a threat to humans, and they should also take into account the security system. Remembering the last skirmish with Katerina, if it were possible to rewrite the previously listed articles, then it would be easier for her to reprogram Erica rather than keep her silent all this time. Erica remained silent, not knowing how to object to this fact. Joe praised Jane for her intelligence, because even she is not able to ignore the laws of the first article, as noted earlier. She said that there are 3 levels of protection in the robot security system. The first 3 articles are in the Good Witch category and is intended to protect people. The Oscar category prevents illegal rewiring, and the Clyd category. Joe admitted that her master hacked her all the way to Oscar, but the Good Witch turned out to be much more difficult, and no one will be able to hack her in the next 50 years. Erica was amazed at the man's abilities. When Joe named her master's name, Jane looked at her with enthusiasm, saying that he was a very famous person and everyone knew his name. She said everything she knew about the Cheshire Cat. Firstly, he was the best hacker in the whole world. He reveals the illegal activities of terrorist groups, governments, and financial institutions. Touching Sam, Jane said that he was an ardent fan of this man, and if they managed to meet him one day, she asked if she could get an autograph. Joe replied that if they really managed to find him, they could ask for at least thousands of autographs. She admitted that she was not sure whether her master was still alive or not. The Cheshire Cat tried to hack into the system of one company, but they were spotted, and the police very quickly discovered their temporary location. When they broke in, Cheshire fled. Therefore, all this time she was just looking for a way to kill time, doing what she wanted to do with the owner while they were together. After listening to her, Jane asked what exactly she wanted to do. Smiling, Joe replied that she had always dreamed of breaking into the presidential palace. At the same time, Katerina and Greg were already in the director's office. The man was very excited. He never dreamed that the day would ever come when he would meet the president in person. Suddenly, the president, without turning around, spoke. From the report he received, he knew that Katerina had failed in obtaining data on the cure. They had lost one of the best ships, and worst of all, she had used Mars without his permission. Afterwards, he asked how much impudence she had to ask for a personal audience after all of the above. Katerina clenched her fists from tension. Taking a step forward, she said that they clearly knew what exactly caused the data acquisition operation to fail. When she said that due to a lack of information about the true nature of the robot's energy source, she was unable to cope with the situation, the man smirked. Having accepted this answer, he asked how Katerina would explain using Mars without permission. The girl explained that this was a situation in which they could not assume what exactly the infected Clarice could do with the data, which is why she acted as she saw fit to obtain the data and eliminate the threat. Turning around, the president clarified whether this was her order. He wondered since when did she consider herself his equal, since she believed that she had enough power to use dangerous weapons on her own. Katerina replied that she only did what she considered necessary in that situation. She explained this by saying that the commander-in-chief must be flexible and take any action during the war, leading people along with him. The man looked at her with a frown after listening to her answer. The next moment he asked her to come closer to him. Katerina complied with the request and took a few more steps forward. A few seconds later she stopped in front of Bishop. For a couple of moments he stood still, saying nothing. Then he suddenly pulled out a pistol and put the barrel to Katerina's head. Seeing this scene, Greg began to seriously worry about his commander. Bishop shared that he had heard rumors that Katerina was getting rid of any of her subordinates who were looking for excuses for their mistakes. After which he said that now she is becoming like them, trying to evade responsibility under various pretexts. The girl replied that she would accept any punishment for her actions. Katerina said that she received her uniform 23 years ago, and until now they have never tried to evade responsibility for their actions. Afterwards, she explained that the real reason for today's meeting was not an excuse, hearing which he would have ignored not only the fact that the operation was a failure, but also the careless analysis of the data of other employees. She is here to accurately report the seriousness of the situation and its solution. Speaking about solving the problem that had arisen, Katerina mentioned a legion of super soldiers, which obeys only the president. The commander asked Bishop to transfer to her part of the rights to command this detachment. The man replied that she was too self-confident. He suggested that by believing that she had achieved her title through her own efforts, Katerina considered herself an outstanding person. Afterwards, the man released the safety, saying that the situation was actually completely different. It was he who gave her her current status and power. After checking her out once again, Bishop said that there were many people who could replace her. After these words, he pulled the trigger and the sound of a shot was heard. When Jane and Erica heard about Joe's plans, they called her crazy. Erica said that no matter how brilliant the Cheshire Cat might be, doing something like that is too reckless. Joe explained that it was all because of the evidence found with her master. They suspect that the president may have artificially caused a virus that turns into zombies. At the same time, Greg looked at the president in horror. There was barely noticeable smoke coming from the man's gun from the shot. Katerina still stood in front of Bishop, with a scratched cheek and a bleeding ear grazed by a bullet. The man was surprised that the girl didn't even flinch when he fired. Lowering the gun, he said that if she had tried to dodge the bullet, she could have lost her life, and then asked why she was sure that he had not intended to kill her in the first place. Katerina replied that there was nothing surprising in her action. She only took responsibility for her words that she would accept any punishment. Sighing, Bishop walked over to his desk, saying that for her contributions to combat command over the years, he would turn a blind eye to her mistakes this time. Turning to him, Katerina reminded him that she had never heard an answer to her request. She again asked if he would allow her to take part of the command rights of a squad of super soldiers. Bishop looked at her threateningly, telling her not to forget her place. Sometime later, he and Greg left his office. Having caught up with his commander, the man asked if she was okay, but the girl replied that the military should not worry about a minor scratch. She was annoyed that, even after putting her life in danger as a sign of her devotion, her request was rejected. Turning around, Katerina looked at the bag her companion was carrying. Exhaling heavily, she decided that even this would be enough for her today. The commander hoped that the items she received from Bishop would benefit her in the future. At the same time, Bishop was in his office watching a recording of battles with robots that had gotten out of control. When they knocked on his door, he gave permission to enter. Walking inside, Siegfried greeted the man. The president asked him to come and look at this recording. When Siegfried approached the table, the man pointed at Jane, saying that it was a robot that caused excitement among the highest military officials. Then he asked who, in his opinion, created this robot. After analyzing all the data obtained from the recording, Siegfried replied that it was Dr. Louise. He said that no one else could create something like that for anyone other than her. Having received the answer, Bishop tiredly covered his eyes with his hand. This woman has always remained a mystery to him. But the man did not understand why she decided to intervene and stop his plans right now. At the same time, the company of our heroes continued on their way. After hearing the suggestion that the president could artificially cause the virus, Erica replied that this assumption was unfounded and made no sense. Joe asked why she rejected the idea. Erica explained that even the Association of Scientists spent more than 6 months studying this virus, and still no one is sure where this virus came from. She admitted that her owner also began to suspect the president immediately after the UN meeting. But with all his power, it is impossible for this type of virus to appear and spread unnoticed by health organizations. Joe listened to her interlocutor with interest. But when she fell silent, She laughed and said that it was too stupid. Yet Joe was delighted that Erica's owner was Dr. Clarice, who had no equal in the field of medicine. Erica frowned when Joe said that the more professional a person was, the more likely it was that they would not be able to see the beam in their own eye, and their imagination would be too limited. To everyone's surprise, she suggested that it might be possible to cause an epidemic without the need to create a virus. Excited, Jane asked how this was possible. Pointing forward, Joe replied that they were heading to Sector F6 to confirm or refute this hypothesis. Bishop handed Siegfried his cap, telling him to find this pet robot. The man gave him orders to find out how Louise's legacy could affect his plan. Having accepted this order, Siegfried threw on his cloak. After that, he headed towards the balcony, saying that he would return having successfully completed his mission. Coming out onto the balcony, Siegfried stopped. He looked up, starting synchronization with the satellite. It only took him a couple of seconds to establish the connection. After that, he could access any data. After analyzing the area around Louise's house, he discovered a damaged military robot 80 meters to the southeast. Knowing the initial data, it was not difficult for him to calculate the current location of his target. Having finished the analysis, he jumped to a higher point. Looking around, Siegfried tried to determine the direction he needed. A moment later, he established that his target was moving at a speed of 70 kilometers per hour towards Sector F6 along the highway 14 kilometers away. Having outlined his route, he was ready to set off to capture his target. As Siegfried jumped into the air, blue light streamed from the holes in his cloak. A moment later, a pair of wings appeared behind him. After that, he rushed towards his target's location with lightning speed. Siegfried covered a long distance in short moments, and so he found himself a couple of kilometers from the route he needed. Unaware of the threat looming over them, Erica said that they would be there in just 10 minutes. Suddenly, she felt someone approaching. Jane also felt something very dangerous approaching them. Erica turned around, warning the others of the danger. Looking at the sky, Jane reported that someone was approaching them at very high speed. After analyzing the data, she determined that such energy could only belong to a robot. With every second, he became closer and closer to them. A moment later, he landed a couple of meters from the car, blocking their path. Once the large amount of energy they released was reduced, they were able to make out a human silhouette through the column of dust. Siegfried slowly rose from his knees. Joe was filled with horror when she realized that there was a super soldier in front of them. Having taken a few steps forward, he stopped, saying that he was very pleased to meet those present. Jane watched his every move warily. Bowing, Siegfried announced that he had contacted the presidential palace and was a military robot holding the position of head of the Security Council. When he raised his head again, his body was surrounded by many small electrical discharges. Siegfried said that Jane should have already guessed the reasons for his appearance here. She really guessed for what purpose the super soldier was sent to them. The next moment, she jumped out of the car under the surprised looks of her friends. Despite their cries of protest, she landed a few steps away from Siegfried. She then activated her weapon station, preparing to attack. Joe completely stopped understanding what was happening here. She recorded how the generated power of the energy core increased 3.5 times. Suddenly, Jane said that she would fight him herself. Siegfried did not move, studying the enemy. She asked Erica to take everyone as far away from here as possible, but she objected that she could also fight with her. Jane more insistently asked her to do as she said. Erica looked uncertainly at Sam sitting behind her. Then she turned back and nodded. She stepped on the pedal and changed gear. A moment later, the car turned around and sped off in the opposite direction. Siegfried said that sending his friends away was a wise decision. After that, he said that his goal was only her. If innocent people were here, they would unwittingly also be involved in this. I got into a fighting position and asked him only for one thing. Despite what would happen here, she asked not to drag the others into their personal squabbles. Siegfried looked at her incessantly. Meanwhile, Joe demanded an explanation from Erica about what they had done that caused a super soldier to come after them. But Erica asked her to shut up because she was trying to calculate all possible outcomes and could not answer her. Excited, Sam looked into the distance, worried about Jane. Suddenly, the sounds of battle reached them. The sound wave emanating from their blows even reached them. Joe couldn't even imagine how powerful their attacks must be. Meanwhile, Jane fought a fierce battle with Siegfried. She concentrated all her strength into her fist. The super soldier decided to use the same techniques as Jane. A moment later, their fists collided with each other. Suddenly, the car stopped. When Erica got out of the car, Joe angrily asked what she was doing. But she left this question unanswered and looked into the distance, hoping that everything would be fine with Jane. Erica was well aware of the reason why she decided to remain alone, because even if the two of them attacked the super soldier, they would not be able to defeat him. At the same time, Jane and Siegfried were still confronting each other. Suddenly, her hand began to develop cracks. A moment later, it crumbled into small pieces. Thus, Jane lost her advantage in the battle. Having lost her hand, she took a few steps back. She then turned around to throw a kick. But the super soldier managed to dodge her blow by tilting his torso back. To keep his balance, he had to take a step back. Jane rushed at her opponent again, giving him no time to counterattack. Thanks to his extensive experience in battle, Siegfried knew how he could get out of such a situation. He took another step back, transferring his weight to his supporting leg. Then he stood up and again concentrated his strength in his fist. The next moment, he punched the air when Jane was literally 2 steps away from him. Due to the shockwave, she flew back several meters. At one point, Jane swung her leg to help herself fall back to the ground. As soon as she knelt down, Siegfried was already approaching her. Suddenly, a few kilometers away, Joe, Erica, and Sam heard an unusually loud sound from the attack. They all peered into the distance with horror and bewilderment, wondering what was happening there. Suddenly, Joe turned to Erica, asking if everything would be okay. Judging by the sounds that were coming to them, Jane could die like that. After her words, Erica activated her combat module. Joe was surprised that she, like Jane, could also regulate the power of her core. She interrupted Joe when she asked why they left Jane alone. Erica said that the super soldier would be here soon and asked her to get as far away from here as possible so that Sam wouldn't be dragged into this. Turning around, she explained that this boy is the only hope of humanity. After her words, Joe looked at him in disbelief. With a resigned sigh, she got behind the wheel, saying that out of the kindness of her heart, she would fulfill this request. A moment later, the car started moving, and Joe finally shouted that Erica must help Jane. Jane herself stood on her feet with all her strength. She assumed that she would not be able to defeat the super soldier, but she did not think that there was a whole abyss between them. Shaking off the dust from his cloak, Siegfried noted that the power of her core was comparable to his own. But due to her lack of experience in combat, her attacks were easy to read, and there was no way she could respond to his attacks. He also noticed that her energy does not circulate so smoothly, so there is a slight delay in her movements. For the same reason, the force of her blow is reduced several times. Siegfried summarized all the facts known to him, adding the results of the analysis of the battle that had just taken place. He said that Jane was Dr. Louise's unfinished product. Surprise showed on her face. Jane didn't understand how he knew anything about Louise. Meanwhile, the super soldier continued. He knew that Louise was definitely not the person who would release an unfinished product. And the fact that she was walking around the area led him to guess that Dr. Louise had already left this world. This thought resonated unpleasantly somewhere in his chest, and closing his eyes for a few moments, he lowered his head. After taking off his glove, Siegfried said that he must report everything to the president. Looking at Jane, he said that the unfinished house robot would not become a threat to them in the future, and with a high probability, he would order him to deal with it, so it would be best to do it now. Jane understood that she would not survive and was already ready to say goodbye to life. But suddenly something else caught Siegfried's attention. He looked in the direction where Jane's friends had gone, exploring the area. The super soldier determined that positronic energy had been detected 25 kilometers from here. At the same time, Erica again transformed her hand into a weapon. She was sure that the super soldier came only for Jane, because from the very beginning he only challenged her to fight. That's why she wanted to deal with him on her own. It's much better to sacrifice one person than to be destroyed altogether. Erica supported this judgment, which seemed the most logical way out of the current situation. But the memory of Jane asking her to become friends kept popping up in her mind. She decided that she had to help her at any cost. Siegfried has already managed to identify the source of the energy that he began to feel a couple of moments ago. Jane also understood everything and began to worry about her friend, who had decided to take such a desperate step. Erica mentally apologized to Jane for not fulfilling her request, but she didn't want to lose her friends at all. Her hand had already transformed into a cannon. Erica was preparing to fire. A couple of moments later, the weapon was 95% loaded. In those few seconds remaining until it was fully charged, she began scanning the area looking for her target. A moment later, Siegfried was discovered. Suddenly, Erica realized that Jane could also suffer from the power of an ordinary positron bomb explosion. Therefore, she decided to resort to changing the size of the trunk. She managed to change the size, reducing the explosive power and increasing the piercing power. The super soldier, who analyzed the situation, believed that at the moment the positron bomb attack was more dangerous than Jane. Therefore, his primary goal was to eliminate the threat in the person of Erica. Immediately after that, he jumped out of his seat and a blue glow appeared on his back again. Jane wanted to stop him because she knew that none of them could stand against him. Erica's weapon was already 100% charged. The next moment, she fired from the cannon. Siegfried was already running at full speed towards Erica. He remembered that in the recording she used a reflective type gun. Now she independently produces energy and uses it to attack. Having put the pieces of the puzzle together into a whole picture, he concluded that the system developed by Louise has the ability to learn in combat. Approaching the bomb, Siegfried realized that he had previously underestimated the enemy, and that in the future, they could become a serious threat. After doing a lot of calculations with various variables constantly added, the results show that she will not be able to completely destroy the super soldier, but there will be a chance, together with Jane, to put him in a vice. Suddenly, something happened that Erica could not have foreseen. Siegfried surrounded himself with a barrier that withstood the energy of her cannon. With every second, he became closer and closer to her, and not even a small crack appeared on the barrier. When he caught up with Erica, Siegfried removed his barrier and dug his fingers into the cannon. She realized she had miscalculated when the fingers of his other hand closed around her neck. A moment later, Siegfried tore the cannon from her torso, breaking it in half. Jane ran to her friend's aid. She was well aware that their attacks would not cause any harm to the super soldier, so she hurried to protect her friend from a worse outcome. Jane hoped that Erica would have time to escape. Reaching where she thought Erica would be, Jane slowed down. But the next moment, she froze in place at what she saw. Siegfried lifted Erica high off the ground, holding her neck with one hand. Noticing Jane's presence, she looked in her direction and told her to run. At the same moment, the super soldier squeezed his fingers, and Erica's head was separated from her torso. Jane watched this scene with wide eyes. She did not immediately realize what had just happened. With the primary source of the threat incapacitated, Siegfried threw the robot's torso to the ground. Looking at her, he said that he did not understand at all the reason for such a stupid act. It was obvious even to him that Erica knew that they could not defeat him, but still sacrificed herself for a reason unknown to him. Despite the fact that Jane was a robot, at that moment she was overwhelmed with emotions. Dusting off his gloves, the super soldier said that he had already collected enough information about them, and it was time for him to complete this mission. Then he turned in her direction. However, she rushed past him so quickly that he did not even have time to react. Jane managed to deprive him of his left arm in just a split second. He looked in surprise at the place where his hand had been a moment ago. He was amazed that Jane was able to exceed her maximum speed in the blink of an eye. Having examined it more carefully, Siegfried noticed how the power of its core was increased several times more. Rising slowly, Jane asked him to refrain from suggesting that Erica was stupid. She said that if it were her, she would have done the same. Turning around, Jane threw his hand aside. During this time, Siegfried managed to conduct a thorough analysis of the data. He determined that the reason for the increase in the power of her core was anger. Siegfried could not understand the reason why Louise needed to create such a terrifying creature. Suddenly, Jane approached him and hit him in the chest area with all her might. Meanwhile, Joe and Sam grew further and further apart. Joe didn't understand at all how she got involved in this whole situation. She just wanted to go for a ride. In just a couple of hours, she managed to encounter several things that she did not understand. She was tormented by the question of why Jane and Erica could control the power of their cores. If they were reflashed, then this would require an Oscar-level security hack, which raised another question that haunted her. Who else besides her master could do something like that? In addition, there was a whole swarm of other questions in her head, both about Sam, who, for reasons unknown to her, is the hope of humanity, and also about the super soldier. Suddenly, Sam began to shout something and actively pull her by the hood. Because of these actions of the guy, Joe suddenly braked. After that, she turned to him, saying that when someone is driving, they should not be distracted from the road. But he didn't listen to her at all and, knocking on the car, pointed his finger to where they came from. Joe understood what exactly Sam was trying to tell her, and then asked him if he wanted them to go back. In response, the guy actively nodded his head. She liked his proposal and began to twist the steering wheel, turning the car around. After that, they rushed back at full speed. Joe was determined to find out all the details of the situation in which she found herself, no matter what the cost. Jane managed to inflict a serious attack on Siegfried. In a rage, she struck him blow after blow. During one of the next attacks, Siegfried's cap fell to the ground. He didn't resist as Jane took out her emotions on him. The super soldier noticed that the angrier she became, the stronger her blows became. It was quite obvious that Jane would not stop until she destroyed her offender. So he decided to counterattack. Dodging his attack, she spun around in the air and prepared to strike again. The next moment, she kicked her opponent with all her might. Siegfried did not have time to escape from under her blow. The next moment, he watched as his second arm was separated from his body. Jane landed on the ground opposite her opponent. Siegfried became convinced that the power of her power changed depending on her emotions, just like a person. The next moment, many chains began to appear from his body. It felt like they were coming straight from his core. Jane noticed that Siegfried's core energy had increased greatly. The system warned him that all the necessary conditions had been met and restrictions on his core would be lifted. Watching the transformation of her opponent, Jane felt the danger emanating from him. A moment later, the transformation was complete and Siegfried's peaceful mode was disabled. Not even a fraction of a tenth of a second had passed before Jane was attacked. Her entire body was crushed into small pieces. The last thing she saw was Siegfried's cold eyes. Once Jay was taken down, his combat mode was disabled and automatic self-healing activated. Seconds later, his severed arms were restored. Taking a few steps forward, he picked up his cap. Shaking it off from the dust, Siegfried put it back on. Pulling on his gloves, he stopped at the body of the incapacitated Jane. Looking in front of him, the super soldier held his gaze at his defeated opponents. He replayed today's battle in his head and noted that these two robots had such traits as the ability to self-learn, self-sacrifice, friendship, and emotionality. Siegfried came to the realization that Linda was trying to create more humane robots. He felt a slight sadness at this thought because he was also her creation. Suddenly, he closed his eyes, throwing all unnecessary thoughts out of his head. Siegfried then approached Jane's body. But he didn't have time to do anything because he was suddenly called out. A moment later, a car stopped next to him. Activating her ability, Joe said that this is where he will meet his end. After smiling, she began to finger something at high speed. The super soldier only examined the new arrivals, not reacting in any way to Joe's words. Trying to get out of the car, Sam lost his balance and fell to the ground. Groaning painfully, he began to rub the bruise. Suddenly, behind Siegfried, the guy noticed the motionless bodies of Jane and Erica. His gaze filled with concern. Siegfried seemed surprised when he noticed Sam's unusual behavior. He carefully watched the guy as he ran towards Jane, trying to get at least some information about him. A moment later, Sam knelt down next to his robot and took her body in his arms and began to cry. The super soldier, unnoticed by the guy, approached them, intending to get rid of the infected. But suddenly he was shackled with chains, not allowing him to take a single step. Joe reminded herself by shouting that Siegfried should be more attentive to his opponents. Looking at her, he asked if she was a member of the hacker community. Joe nodded her head and smiling said that she had already taken control of his neural circuits. But as soon as Siegfried closed his eyes for one moment, the chains that bound him immediately disappeared. For Joe, this turned out to be a painful experience. Turning to her, he said that there was no one in the whole world who could bypass his security system. She just smiled wryly, rubbing her arm that ached in pain. The super soldier explained that every level of his system was protected by the Good Witch. Joe shouted that even in this case, he could not interfere with the reunion of Sam and his robot like that. She had already guessed that his mission was not to destroy them. Joe justified her assumption by the fact that when Erica aimed at him, he immediately stopped her. Also with Jane, they fought a fierce battle, but then he increased his strength and defeated her in just one movement. She said that if he didn't hold back, he could have defeated both of them instantly. But he was deliberately hiding her. Everyone knows that robots don't need to fight so ineffectively without any special reason. Based on this, Joe assumed that all this time Siegfried had been collecting data on Jane, who had transformed in a very strange way. Jumping out of the car, she said that most likely he was also tasked with destroying her after receiving the data. But fortunately for her, it did not seem at all like he intended to do this. She was sure that if this were not so, the super soldier would have destroyed her long ago instead of listening to her long speeches. Closing his eyes, he confirmed her guesses, adding that the president had added a few more conditions to him. After that, Siegfried turned to her, saying that his mission was completed and he could return back. Jane took out salt and showered it on the super soldier standing in front of her, telling him to leave this place as soon as possible. When Siegfried said that even if he let them go today, Joe should not relax, she looked at him with incomprehension. He explained that when he fights robots, an electromagnetic pulse is automatically emitted during his attacks. Looking at Jane, Siegfried said that although he did not attack her core directly, his electromagnetic blasts themselves caused a sufficient amount of damage. Joe's eyes widened in horror when she heard that he himself was not sure whether the core could be restored after something like this. Turning around, Siegfried said that since Jane and Erica were incapacitated, their further fate was not his concern. He explained this by saying that Louise's unfinished project ended only there. Then wings appeared from his cloak again. Sam hugged Jane tighter and looked at the super soldier angrily. Siegfried noticed the gaze directed at him and turned his attention to the boy. Looking closer, he noticed that he looked familiar. The super soldier remembered that Louise had a locket with a photo of a boy who looked like Sam. Afterwards, he lost interest in the guy. The next moment, Joe watched as Siegfried soared into the sky. She watched and shouted after him so that he would never come back here again. Then she came to her senses and picked up the bodies of the robots, simultaneously telling Sam to collect the remaining small parts from them. Several hours later, they finally reached Sector F6. All the while, Sam held Jane's torso in his arms. Turning to him, Joe told him that he should not worry ahead of time, because she was still not dead. Then she began to look around, looking for the address she needed. Suddenly, she saw the desired number and joyfully headed in that direction. A few minutes later, she parked at the House of OZ branch building. To get inside, they needed a key card. But with her skills, it was not difficult to hack into the system and gain access. The next moment, the door in front of her began to open. Once inside, she was glad that the electricity was still working. When she got to the lounge, Joe told Sam to leave Erica and put her on Jane's bed. Looking at her, the guy nodded uncertainly. Then they laid her down on the bed together. Joe was very worried because if the robot core was turned off for a long time, then automatic data deletion would begin. Therefore, a destroyed robot core is tantamount to human death. She hoped that she would have time to correct the situation in time. Having opened Jane's chest compartment, the surprised Joe pulled back. After examining the core, she came to the conclusion that, fortunately for them, it was not completely destroyed. What surprised her so much was an unusual type of core. Jane opened her eyes 2 days later. She was unable to fully recover due to the damage the core received from the electromagnetic pulse. She immediately began to calculate her location. Joe suddenly appeared and grabbed all her attention. She was incredibly glad that she finally woke up. Not understanding anything, Jane asked what was going on here. She recounted the events of a day ago, mentioning that the super soldier only intended to collect more information about her, and having completed his mission, he returned back. After this, Joe began to bombard the newly awakened Jane with many questions. When all the questions were finally voiced, she apologized, saying that her system was still recovering and she was not able to answer all these questions at once. Suddenly, a medical hammer flew into Joe's head. Erica was sitting on the next bed, making another remark to her. Sam entered the room and joyfully ran to his robot. Joe turned her attention to Erica, who had also finished her recovery a few moments ago, beginning to bombard her with the same mountain of questions. Due to excessive emotionality and carelessness on Joe's part, Erica's head was again torn away from her body. Jane and Sam watched in horror at such a terrifying scene. Sometime later, an irritated Erica's head was returned to its place and wrapped in duct tape for a while. Approaching her, Jane shared her joy that everyone had survived and was now safe. Erica replied that although they got out alive this time, they might not be so lucky next time. She said that besides Siegfried, there are several other super soldiers, and even if they attack them all together, then in the current state they cannot even defeat one such soldier. The worst thing, in her opinion, was that they could find them at any time thanks to communication with the satellite. After her words, Jane remembered how they fought with Siegfried. And sadly lowering her head, she said that Erica was absolutely right. Suddenly, Joe grabbed the hem of her dress. She asked when they would finally decide to answer her questions. Jane smiled, saying that she would definitely tell her everything. But there were too many questions, and it would be too ineffective to answer them one at a time. She decided that it would be better if she simply conveyed her memories to Joe and sat down next to her, asking if she was satisfied with this option. She was told that anything would do, as long as she could satisfy her curiosity. But Jane warned that her operating system had not yet fully recovered, and she would only be able to transfer data in 20 minutes. Erica interjected, asking if there was information that Joe should share in turn. She recalled that while on the road, they raised the question that the president could be the one who caused the epidemic. She already had an assumption that all these days, while they were recovering, Joe was not sitting idle, but was looking for evidence of this theory. Smiling, she nodded, telling everyone to follow her. And a few minutes later, they were walking down the long corridor of the research center, following Joe. Suddenly, something behind the glass caught Sam's attention. He stopped and tried to say something, looking into the adjacent room through the glass. Jane noticed this and also stopped. Approaching the glass, she realized what exactly caused such a reaction from her master and called Erica. She approached in the same way and froze, looking through the glass in bewilderment. In the adjacent room, there were several dozen models of military robots. Joe explained that this place used to be a laboratory for one of the branches of the House of OZ, usually where the latest and improved research products were produced. Turning to her companions, she said that robots were also created here. Looking at all this, Jane asked why there were so many robots left here. Smiling, Joe replied that they should have already figured everything out on their own. She began to explain that in 1941, the world was united under the military might of the Third Empire. But during the revolution, the dictator was executed and the Third Empire collapsed. After this, a world coalition government was created to prevent the re-establishment of dictatorship. But at the same time, rebels appeared who demanded independence. They organized wars with UN forces, then more than 1,000 government soldiers were killed. After the destruction of one of the largest sectors, in order to prevent as many military deaths as possible, a project to create military robots was launched, and 2 years later it was presented to society. Joe said that the main reason robots exist is to fight in wars instead of humans. She then asked if they had ever heard of robots being involved in battles before the virus. Jane replied that even checking records from 12 years ago, nothing of the kind had happened, Joe confirmed, saying that the robots created were just failures that never saw action in battle, according to official documents. She explained that military-style robots have outdated bodies that consume fuel, unlike modern robots that get power from the energy they generate. But due to the presence of artificial intelligence, using them in a real battle would be too stupid, because one of the main laws prohibits robots from attacking people. Also, their neural network protection is too weak and can be easily hacked, making such a robot completely useless. But for some unknown reason, the president created more than 5 million copies of such a useless model. Erica suggested that in the process of troubleshooting their malfunctions, a catastrophe with a virus could have occurred, and their production was stopped. Joe replied that this option was possible. She then shared the results of her research, during which she scanned more than 300 robots she encountered on her way here. She learned that the production date showed that production had been completed for quite some time, but she could not find a system update log or anything else. Joe assumed it was because all these military robots for the president weren't a failure at all. Then she asked a tricky question. To fight against whom were military robots created that cannot even fight against humans? When Jane wanted to express her guess, Joe interrupted her, saying that so far it had been a pretty reasonable story. Approaching the door, she asked if they were ready to see the moment in which this story intersects with reality. The door to the room that contained all the answers opened terribly slowly, causing tension from waiting for so long. When the door finally opened, Joe pointed to an old computer in the middle of the room that had been used by researchers 12 years ago. That evening at the presidential palace, Siegfried gave the president a recording of his fight with Jane. Bishop was currently looking at the part where Siegfried suggested that this robot was one of Louise's unfinished works. The man peered carefully at the image. When he heard that Louise had already left this world, he closed his eyes, frowning. At this point, Bishop turned off the video. Turning around in his chair, Siegfried said that he had another report. He reported that Jane's team was currently spotted in the old branch of the House of OZ in Sector F6. The super soldier clarified that this was a laboratory where secret military robots were being developed, and if they are not careful, the truth about the virus could be revealed. Bishop replied that he didn't care because the Venus project had already started anyway. Even if the truth was revealed, it wouldn't affect his plan in any way. After that, he said that the robot could be free. Left alone with himself, the man took out one of his favorite cigarettes. Holding the lit lighter up to the cigarette, he inhaled the tobacco smoke. Then he turned back to the table and pulled out one of the shelves, which contained one single photograph for many years. Taking the frame in his free hand, his gaze filled with sadness. The man hoped with all his heart that there was no afterlife. After all, if heaven did exist, he was sure that in this case he and Louise would meet at the very bottom of hell. At the same time, Joyful Joe said that this is where they will find out the answers to all their questions. Then she ran into the room and tenderly hugged the computer that stored valuable information for them. Approaching him, Erica could not believe that this computer, storing such important data, was just abandoned here. Joe said that in contrast to careful server management, people might forget about an old computer hidden in a warehouse like this, which worked to their advantage. Having found the necessary file, she asked if everyone was ready to discover the truth. Having received everyone's consent, she unpaused the recording. Then she explained that the recording currently playing was a test video recorded a year before military robots were introduced to the whole world. Erica and Jane couldn't believe what was happening on the tape. In this video, military robots killed zombies. When the girls simultaneously asked how this was possible, Joe replied that these were not real infected, but only a created imitation. Erica was surprised because their appearance and behavior are exactly the same as those of the infected. Smiling, Joe asked if Clarice had mentioned that it was impossible to create an artificial virus. She might agree with this statement, but the top government knew about the approach of this virus at least 13 years before its appearance. Joe summarized that the robots were created from the very beginning to fight the infected, but they did not yet know exactly when the first outbreak would occur, so they created the robots in advance to be prepared. Hearing this, Jane was beside herself with anger. She said that she fundamentally disagreed with the idea of exterminating the infected. She sincerely believed that the government took such a terrible step because there was no other choice. But as it turned out, to her great horror, they deliberately ignored the fact that billions of people would be infected and destroyed. Jane said that they would never be forgiven. Joe suddenly intervened and said that there was another person who saw the virus coming. Turning, she pointed at Jane, saying that it was the man who had remade her. Hearing this statement, Jane was confused. Joe explained that it would be almost impossible for a person who lived as a recluse in the wilderness to transform her and improve all her characteristics to the highest level, to pull off such a thing. She was sure that the person who remade Jane knew about the impending virus and that the government would get rid of the infected, because Jane was specially prepared for all these conditions. After her words, Jane remembered how Layla asked her to protect Sam with the power she gave her. Now she had no doubt that that woman already knew about everything in advance. Joe also said she had a guess as to what the man used to do. Seeing Jane's blank face, she said that if she shared her memory data, she would be able to confirm her assumption. Jane replied that there were still 4 minutes left before her system was restored, so data transfer was not yet possible. After that, Joe began to excitedly run around her, asking her to hurry up. At the end of the promised period, Jane touched Joe's head with both hands. The next moment, she started transmitting data to her. Suddenly, images of Jane's past began to flash before her eyes, starting with her very first meeting with Sam. After she saw the memories associated with Louise, assessing her skills, Joe said that it would be very difficult for her master to reach her level. Suddenly, analyzing the facts she knows about this man, such as retirement, old age, virus prediction, and incredible abilities in the field of programming and engineering, she finally realized what Louise's true identity was. At the same moment, Jane pulled away from Joe, saying that the data transfer was completed. Embarrassed, she asked to ignore everything personal. But to her surprise, Joe started talking about breaking the law. She repeated that the second paragraph of the first article had been violated, which stated that the robot should not receive data relating to a person whose data is designated as top secret. Hearing this, the others were seriously frightened and surrounded their friend. Joe did not react to their words, but only repeated that due to violation of the law, all her data must be erased. A few moments later, the forced data wipe began. Jane tried her best to reach her, but she still did not react to the words. Erica said that she was not responding to them at all, and that they urgently needed to take her to the repair room. Jane immediately picked Joe up in her arms and headed into the indicated room. She froze when she heard that the data destruction was 98% complete. Erica reminded them that they should hurry up or the system could be completely destroyed. But suddenly, Joe's hidden code was activated. After this, her body was engulfed in a bright glow. The Cheshire Cat's security system froze the code prescribing the second paragraph of the first article of the law, after which data recovery began. Erica did not understand at all what was happening now, but Jane assumed that Joe was now recovering. A few moments later, she opened her eyes. When she regained her ability to speak, she admitted that she thought that she would die a little longer. When the data was analyzed, Joe determined that 0.7% of the data had been lost. Afterwards, she asked Erica what exactly she said while she was passed out. She replied that she mentioned the first article and the second point. Hearing this, Joe again had a complete picture of who Louise was in the past. Smiling joyfully, she cried out that now everything fell into place. Then she turned excitedly to Jane. Taking her by the shoulders, Joe said that the man who remade her was truly incredible. Pointing to herself, she said that Louise was her mother. Jane looked at her in bewilderment. She asked Joe what exactly she meant. Erica said that her artificial intelligence was damaged. Erica then patted the chair, asking Joe to sit on it for an examination, but she just laughed, saying that she was fine. Joe pointed to Jane, saying that Louise was her mother too. Turning her attention to Erica, she said that her mother did the same. Pointing at Sam, she said that this person was definitely not his mother. Joe explained that Louise was a member of Team OZ and is the mother of all robots. Jane asked what the OZ team was like. Erica admitted that she was also hearing about this for the first time. Joe explained that in the 50s, a group of OZ was created, consisting of brilliant scientists, programmers, and engineers. They were the ones who developed artificial intelligence robots. From laws and a self-healing core, right up to a central database that contains information from all over the world. All this was developed by the OZ team. Turning to Sam, Jane admitted that she had no idea that Louise was such an incredible person. Suddenly, Eliza intervened in the conversation, saying that something here still didn't add up. She said that robots were considered the best invention of the 20th century, and it was included in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Those who made such an achievement should have been registered in the biographical dictionary. But Eliza couldn't find any articles about it, let alone a dictionary, so the story she was told couldn't be true. Sighing, Joe replied that all information about these people had been deliberately erased. It was made as if these people had never existed before, eliminating even the slightest mention of their names anywhere. She said that in 1958, they began to actively register citizens through the network. At the same time, they did not make any records about the birth of these people, their academic background, achievements, and everything else. Even all written records were destroyed, leaving not even a shred of information. Finally, in 1962, when the robots were launched, many journalists appeared looking for information about the developers, but the secret police denied and destroyed all the information. That is why a hidden rule was created, not announced by the government. Jane asked why these people were treated so unfairly, but Jo threw up her hands, saying that she did not know. But she said that thanks to Jane, they had a clue. Jo said at least one of the group members knew about the virus in advance. Suddenly, Erica had another question. She already realized that since the information was so well classified, and no one knew anything about the existence of these people, Erica wondered how Jo knew so much about all this. She replied that her owner was the child of one of the OZ team members. That is why the main goal of the Cheshire Cat was to find out why the information about the existence of her parents was so unfairly erased, and while searching for information, she came across various facts. Turning to Jane, Jo said that she was a custom model that her master had been looking for a very long time. She admitted that she thought that their paths would quickly diverge, but now, Jo is sure that she will remain by her side until she reveals all the secrets. Jane, smiling, replied that she would be all for it. Afterwards, Jo patted Sam on the head, saying that they would not part with him anytime soon. Among their group, only Erica was unhappy about the fact that she would continue to have to endure Jo's terrible character. The next morning, it was decided to go to the Zero Sector. Jo and Sam were full of enthusiasm to continue their journey. Jane was glad that she had a new friend in Jo. She hoped that the place they would go to would help her find out more information about Louise. That same evening, the Cheshire Cat finally reached the place where Louise lived. Approaching the house, she noticed a grave, which she hurried to approach. After reading the name engraved on the tree, Cheshire took the pendant that hung on the grave cross. Taking a closer look, the girl realized that she had already seen the same pendant on her father. The next moment, she opened the pendant. Seeing its contents, Cheshire finally realized why her father never let her touch his pendant. Inside was a photo of Sam.